She flew into that airfield prepared to own it within the hour. She left 6 months later wondering how she had survived 30 years without it. Vanessa Blackwell had written off hundreds of men in $1,000 suits across mahogany boardroom tables. She had never once considered that the man who would finally make her question everything she believed about strength, success, and what a life is actually worth would be standing barefoot beside a dented helicopter, covered in grease, with a gap-toothed 7-year-old hanging off his arm. She called the airfield a forgotten patch of grass. She called the owner a mechanic playing businessman. She was wrong about the airfield. She was devastatingly wrong about the man. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it reaches you somewhere in the middle of the night, hit like and stay until the end. This one's worth it. The first thing Vanessa noticed when the car turned off Route 17 onto the gravel access road was that her GPS had stopped working. Not buffering, not recalculating, just stopped. Like the land itself had decided it wasn't interested in being located. "You sure this is right?" she asked Marcus, her driver, who had been with her company for 9 years and had the particular talent of not reacting to anything she said with visible emotion. "Address matches," he said. "Hargrove Field, Shenandoah County, Virginia." Vanessa looked out the window. Pine trees. A rusted mailbox missing its door. A hand-painted sign with the words Bennett Aviation, stenciled in dark green, slightly uneven, like someone had done it on a Saturday afternoon and hadn't bothered with the level. "Bennett Aviation," she repeated, in the tone most people reserve for terms they find mildly offensive. She had sent 3 separate emails and a formal letter to the property owner before getting a response. No letterhead on his reply. No assistant CC'd. Just a plain message from an address that read nbennett.aviation@gmail.com, 3 short sentences agreeing to the meeting, and a note that said, "Mornings work better. My son has soccer at 2. That message had told her almost everything she thought she needed to know. The gravel transitioned to cracked asphalt as the car passed through a chain-link gate that stood open and unattended. The airfield revealed itself in stages. First the windsock, orange and faded, barely moving in the August heat. Then the single runway, wider than she'd expected, running northeast to southwest with freshly painted center lines. Then 2 hangars, one large and clearly operational, one smaller and older, its corrugated walls darkened by decades of weather. And then the helicopter. It sat outside the large hangar on a concrete pad, its engine cowling removed, exposing the machinery inside. Crouched beside it, half hidden under a component that Vanessa couldn't name, was a man in gray work pants and a faded green shirt. He was working with both hands, and from 20 yards away she could already see the grease on his forearms. Standing next to him, chin high against the helicopter skid, was a small boy in soccer cleats. "Right," Vanessa said quietly. She straightened her jacket before Marcus opened her door. She had worn the charcoal Armani today. Professional, but not aggressive. She had learned, over 10 years of acquisition negotiations, that appearing too powerful in the first meeting sometimes caused small landowners to dig in emotionally before the numbers even arrived on the table. Better to seem reasonable, approachable. She walked across the concrete apron, heels clicking, briefcase in hand, and stopped a few feet from the helicopter. "Mr. Bennett." The man didn't look up immediately. He finished whatever he was doing, tightening something, by the sound of it, and then straightened. He was taller than she'd expected, maybe 6'2", broad across the shoulders in the way that came from actual physical work rather than a gym subscription. His face was, she noted it almost clinically, structurally good. Dark eyes, strong jaw, the kind of bone structure that photographs well. All of it undercut, in her assessment, by the grease stripe across his left cheekbone, and the general impression that he hadn't thought once about how he looked this morning. "That's me," he said. He looked at her hand, glanced at his own, and didn't extend it. "Sorry, don't want to ruin your jacket." "Vanessa Blackwell." She lowered her hand. "Blackwell Logistics." "I know who you are." He wasn't unfriendly. He wasn't especially warm either. He said it the way you'd confirm a package delivery. "This is Eli." The boy had been studying her shoes with the open curiosity that children apply to things they find strange. He looked up when his name was used. 7 years old, she guessed. dark eyes like his father, a smear of what looked like axle grease on his chin, almost certainly transferred from shaking hands with the helicopter. "Hi," Eli said. "Hello," Vanessa said. "Do you know what kind of helicopter this is?" Eli asked. "I don't," she admitted. He looked mildly disappointed. "It's a Bell 206B, 1978. My dad's fixing the tail rotor drive shaft. It's complicated." "I'm sure it is." "He says it'll fly again by Friday." "Eli." Noah's voice was quiet, but it landed. The boy took a small step back and occupied himself with something on the ground. Noah wiped his hands on a shop rag tucked into his back pocket. The rag did not make his hands measurably cleaner, and turned his full attention to Vanessa. There was something in his gaze that she didn't immediately have a word for. Not hostility, not deference. Just assessment. Like he was reading something she hadn't handed him. "We can use the office," he said. The office was a room attached to the back of the large hangar, accessed through a side door. It contained a metal desk, 2 mismatched chairs, a whiteboard covered in technical diagrams, a coffee maker that looked older than Vanessa's career, and 3 framed photographs on the wall. 2 showing aircraft she didn't recognize, one showing Noah in a white dress shirt shaking hands with someone in what appeared to be a government facility. She looked at that photograph for a half-second longer than she intended. He caught it. "Sit down," he said, and went to make coffee without asking whether she wanted any. She sat, opened her briefcase, and arranged her documents in the order she'd prepared. Term sheet, property analysis, proposed lease structure, letter of intent. She had done this dozens of times. The sequence was designed to establish authority progressively, showing the landowner that she had done her homework, that she was serious, that the deal on the table was structured and fair. She had also had her team run a complete background on the property. Hargrove Field. 340 acres in total, named for the original family that homesteaded the land in the 1890s. Bennett family acquired the eastern parcel in 1961, expanded to the full site in 1983 when the original Hargrove descendants sold the remaining acreage. FAA registered General Aviation Facility, operational since 1978. Current owner, Noah Daniel Bennett, age 32, one dependent. Property assessed at $2.1 million. Real estate market value closer to $4.8 million, given proximity to the regional highway corridor. Blackwell Logistics had interest in establishing a mid-Atlantic distribution relay point, and the airfield's runway, 4,200 feet instrument rated, was longer and better maintained than anything else within 40 miles. She planned to offer a 5-year lease with 2 renewal options. Start at $180,000 annually and let him negotiate toward $210,000. He'd feel like he'd won something. She'd get the property secured for less than its market value. Everybody goes home satisfied. That was the plan. Noah set a mug of coffee in front of her. Black. He hadn't asked. She was about to say she took it with cream when she picked it up and tasted it, and it was actually very good. She said nothing and set it down. He sat across from her, forearms on the desk, not looking at her documents, looking at her. "So," he said, "what does Blackwell Logistics need with a field like this?" It was a reasonable question. She'd been asked it before, usually as an opening gambit by property owners trying to establish need before price. She gave her standard answer: regional distribution infrastructure, growing cargo demand in the Appalachian corridor, interest in private aviation partnerships. He listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't nod excessively, didn't lean in to signal enthusiasm. He just listened. When she finished, he said, "What's your approach on fuel infrastructure?" She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your cargo ops. You're moving freight, I assume, short haul to mid-range. What aircraft are you planning to base here? Because the current fuel setup is 100LL and Jet A, separate systems, single-point hydrant, which works fine for our current traffic. But if you're looking at turboprop freight, you'd need the Jet A capacity expanded, and that's a capital investment conversation we'd have to have structurally, not just in a lease." Vanessa held the pause for a moment. "Our aviation team will assess infrastructure needs as part of... Your aviation team sent me an email last week asking whether the runway was paved." He said it without malice. Just delivered it, like a fact about weather. She felt the back of her neck warm slightly. I don't manage individual correspondence from... It's paved, he said. Has been since 1991. I can send them the materials specs if it helps. She picked up her coffee, set it down, picked up her pen. This was not how these meetings went. Mr. Bennett, I think the most productive use of our time would be to review the proposed terms I've prepared. I've seen them. He reached to the corner of his desk and produced a printed copy of her term sheet, the document she had sent via email 3 days prior, with handwritten notes in the margins. Neat handwriting, dense, multiple lines per annotation. She stared at the annotated sheet. When you say full operational access to existing infrastructure, he said, tapping one margin note, does that include the maintenance hangar? Because that's a separate conversation. I use it daily. My certified mechanic uses it. If your cargo operator wants to run line maintenance through that space, we need to define scope, liability, hours, and I'd want a separate operations agreement, not a single lease clause. She was quiet for a moment. You've had legal review these? She asked. No. He looked at her steadily. I read it myself. Outside, faint through the hangar walls, she could hear Eli doing something with a soccer ball, the rhythmic thud of it against a wall. 3 kicks, a pause, 3 kicks. How long have you been running this airfield? She asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, but she caught it. The way you'd catch a single wrong note in a piece of music you knew well. 5 years, he said, give or take. And before that? A beat. He looked at the whiteboard on the far wall rather than at her. The diagrams there were complex, rotor system schematics from what she could see, not the kind of thing you print from a website. Something else, he said. It wasn't rudeness. It was a door, closed firmly but without anger. She recognized that kind of answer from men who'd learned to place limits on what strangers deserved to know. She recalibrated. In the car on the way here, she had assumed this meeting would take 45 minutes. She'd planned to be back in Washington by 1. She had a conference call at 3 and dinner at 7 with her board's investment chair. She looked at Noah's annotated term sheet. She looked at the photograph of him on the wall, the white dress shirt, the formal handshake, the facility she didn't recognize. She looked at him. Can I ask you something directly? She said. Go ahead. Multiple developers have approached you about this property. I know that from the county records and from simple market logic. This land is worth considerably more than what it earns. You've said no to all of them. Why should my proposal be different? He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he was going to give her the closed-door answer again. Then he said, my father built this runway with equipment he borrowed from 3 different neighbors because he couldn't afford to rent it. He poured concrete sections on weekends for 8 months. He died 4 years ago, and he died knowing this field was still here, still flying, still doing what he built it to do. He paused. A developer doesn't keep an airfield running. A developer builds a warehouse and puts the name of a dead man on a lobby placard. I've been offered $12 million for this property in the last 2 years. The answer was no then. It's still no. Vanessa said nothing. What you're offering is a lease, he continued, not a sale. That's the only reason we're having this conversation, but I'm not signing anything that treats this field like a piece of logistics real estate. If Blackwell wants to operate here, it operates as a partner in something that already means something. That's the baseline. The soccer ball outside had gone quiet. A moment later, the side door opened, and Eli appeared in the doorway with grass on his knees and an expression of complete transparency that only children and very honest adults carry. Dad, can I have the granola bar from the truck? Middle console, Noah said, without looking away from Vanessa. The chocolate one or the... Eli. Middle console. Got it. He disappeared. Vanessa looked at the closed door, then back at Noah. You're a difficult negotiation, she said. For the first time, something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. So I've been told. They talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She missed her conference call. She texted her assistant to reschedule and silenced her phone, which she had never done in a business meeting. It just happened. The conversation did not resolve into an agreement. It didn't do what first meetings were supposed to do, which was establish the outline of a deal so that lawyers could fill in the rest. What it did was get complicated. Noah walked her through the airfield's operational history with a precision that was borderline unnerving. Traffic logs, maintenance records, fuel throughput data, FAA compliance filings. Not summaries, actual data. He knew every number. He explained load-bearing tolerances for the main runway apron. He explained the drainage infrastructure. He told her which parts of the property had environmental monitoring requirements and why, and what those monitoring results had shown over the past decade. She had a Harvard MBA and 10 years of infrastructure acquisition experience. She was by any reasonable measure well-informed about operational logistics. She had never felt less informed in a professional conversation. At one point, he drew something on the whiteboard, a site plan modification that would allow her cargo operation to access the fuel system without creating conflict with his maintenance traffic. It was spatially precise. It was also, she realized, genuinely clever. A solution she wouldn't have arrived at. "Did you design the original layout?" she asked. "Modified it," he said. 3 years ago. Original had a taxiway conflict that created a near-miss situation during a busy weekend. I closed the field for 4 days and regraded the intersection. "You did it yourself?" "I had help." He paused. "I know what I'm doing with aircraft infrastructure." "I'm beginning to understand that," she said, and meant it. He looked at her when she said it, really looked, in a way he hadn't quite done before, like he was deciding whether she was being sincere or performing sincerity, and landing on sincerity with some surprise. Bound. Lunch happened accidentally. Eli produced, from a backpack she hadn't noticed before, 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a bag of pretzels, and laid them on the corner of his father's desk with the focused ceremony of someone who has been given a specific job and intends to execute it correctly. "Dad, Mrs. Kowalski said the chicken salad might be a little salty because she used a different brand." "It's fine, Bud." "She said to tell you." Eli looked at Vanessa. "Are you staying for lunch?" Eli, "Ms. Blackwell, probably." "I'll stay," Vanessa said. She wasn't sure why she said it. She had a protein bar in her briefcase and a restaurant reservation in Washington and approximately 14 other things she should be doing. She said it anyway. Noah looked at her. She looked back. "I'll get another sandwich," he said. "There's a diner at the end of Route 17. It takes about—" "It's fine," she said. "I'm not particularly hungry." This was completely untrue. She ate half of Noah's pretzels, which he slid toward her without comment, and she ate them while Eli told her at considerable length about a book he was reading about how airplanes work, which he then went to retrieve from somewhere in the hangar so he could show her specific diagrams. "He's going to show you all of it," Noah said quietly, while Eli was gone. "Fair warning." "I don't mind," she said, which was also, she realized, true. When Eli returned with the book and spread it open on the desk between them, Noah watched her. Not with the evaluating, arms-folded posture of someone waiting for her to perform. More like watching to see what was actually there. She answered Eli's questions about the diagrams honestly, including the ones she didn't know the answers to, which Eli addressed by explaining the answers himself from memory, which he had clearly read multiple times. "He reads everything," Noah said. "I find books in places books shouldn't be. Bathroom, obviously. In the wheel well of the Cessna once." "The wheel well?" "I was checking clearances," Eli said, not looking up from the diagram. "He shouldn't have been in the wheel well," Noah added. "You said I could look at it." "Looking and climbing into are different things. It's a very small wheel well. I barely fit." Vanessa laughed. Actual, uncorporate laughter, the kind she hadn't produced in a meeting in longer than she could measure. Noah looked at her when she laughed. She could feel his gaze without seeing it. When she finally stood to leave, the afternoon had shifted the light through the hangar's high windows to something amber and long. She didn't look at her phone to confirm the time because she already knew it was later than was professionally defensible. Marcus was waiting in the car, presumably having napped or meditated or done whatever Marcus did during unexpected 3-hour delays. Noah walked her out. Eli had fallen asleep on a folded moving blanket in the corner of the office, the airplane book open on his chest. The hangar was cooler than the afternoon outside, and when she stepped back onto the concrete apron, the air was warm and carried the faint smell of avgas and pine. The windsock had come to life in a light breeze from the north.
I'll have my team revise the term sheet based on today's conversation, she said. That'd be fine. I want to include the maintenance hangar framework, separate agreement, like you said. He nodded. And I want your infrastructure specs. All of them. The fuel system documentation, the drainage reports, the runway weight ratings. I'll send them this week. She looked out at the runway. It caught the afternoon light cleanly, center lines white against gray asphalt, running straight and then bending slightly with the land's natural contour. Who built the center lines? She asked. I did, he said. 2 years ago, previous paint had faded. I rented the striper and did it in sections over a weekend. She looked at him. He was squinting slightly against the light, still had the grease stripe on his cheekbone. He had not, at any point in the afternoon, appeared to notice or care about it. Why didn't you hire someone? She asked. He thought about it for a moment, like the question deserved consideration. Because I wanted them straight, he said. She didn't say anything to that. She picked up her briefcase, walked to the car, and got in. As Marcus pulled back down the gravel road, she turned and looked through the rear window. Noah was still standing on the apron. He wasn't watching her go. He turned back toward the helicopter, and even from a distance, she could see that he was already back to thinking about the tail rotor drive shaft, back to the thing he'd been doing before she arrived. She faced forward. Good meeting? Marcus asked. She looked at the pine trees going past, the rusted mailbox, the hand-painted sign with its slightly uneven letters. No, she said. It was a strange meeting. Marcus said nothing, which was, as always, exactly the right response. Oh, she got back to Washington at 7:40. She ate at her kitchen counter standing up, something she had done hundreds of times, the same granite surface and the same view of the city at night, and the same silence that she had always told herself she preferred to the alternative. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the background report on Noah Bennett that her team had compiled, and she read it properly this time, instead of the skim she'd done on the drive down. The report had a professional history section. She had glanced at it before. Now she read it carefully. Noah Daniel Bennett, B.S. in Aerospace Engineering, Virginia Tech, summa cum laude. M.S. in Aeronautical Systems Design, Georgia Tech. Subsequent employment, 3 years at an aeronautical engineering consultancy she didn't recognize, followed by... She stopped. Followed by 6 years at Meridian Aerospace Systems. Senior Propulsion Systems Engineer, later Lead Systems Architect on a government contract she didn't have clearance to read details about, which the report noted with a footnote. Awards listed. One of them from the Department of Defense. She stared at this. Then she scrolled down. Employment ended. Date given. She looked at the date, and then she looked at the section of the report that listed Eli Bennett's birth year and the names of Noah's immediate family, and there, in the flat administrative language of a background report, the fact that his wife, Claire Louise Bennett, had died of a cardiac event at age 29 5 years ago, the same year he left Meridian Aerospace. Vanessa sat back. Outside, Washington was doing what it always did at night. Traffic and light, and the distant sound of a city that never quite went quiet. Her apartment was expensively furnished and carefully impersonal, the way apartments look when someone has paid for good taste but not yet figured out what they personally love. She thought about the moving blanket in the corner of the hangar office, the boy asleep on it with the airplane book on his chest, the way Noah said middle console without looking up, and the way Eli moved, sure and comfortable, through every corner of the airfield like it was the only geography that had ever made sense to him. She thought about the photograph on the wall, the white dress shirt, the formal setting. A man who had built that, those credentials, that trajectory, and then walked away from it to stand on a concrete apron in the Virginia heat with grease on his face, fixing a 40-year-old helicopter because his father had built a runway with borrowed equipment and because his son needed somewhere to belong, and because some things, apparently, meant more than the money. She thought about $12 million, refused. She thought about center lines painted straight over a weekend because he wanted them straight. She closed her laptop. She sat in the quiet for a long time, which was not something Vanessa Blackwell did. She was back at the airfield 4 days later. She told Marcus she needed to review the site in daylight before the infrastructure documentation came through. This was technically true. It was not the complete truth. It was 7:40 in the morning when she turned off Route 17. She had not scheduled this visit. She had not sent an email. The chain link gate was open. The windsock was moving in a light northerly. The Bell 206B was back on its concrete pad, engine cowling reinstalled, and she could hear something running. Rotors, slow and preliminary, the sound of a machine coming back to itself. Noah was standing at the aircraft, headset around his neck, running through what she understood from the look of it to be a ground systems check. He turned when he heard the car and held still for a moment that seemed slightly longer than normal before he raised one hand in the direction of the office. She went to the office. Eli was at the desk, doing what appeared to be math homework. He looked up when she came in. "He said you were coming back," Eli said. "Did he?" "He didn't say today specifically." Eli picked up his pencil again. "But he said probably." She sat in the same chair she'd sat in 4 days ago. The whiteboard still had the site modification drawing on it. The coffee maker was already running, which she suspected was either coincidence or something else. "Is he always right?" she asked. "About things like that?" Eli considered this with the particular gravity that children apply to genuine questions about their parents. "Usually," he said. "He's wrong about soccer. He thinks I'm better at defense, but I'm actually better at midfield, and my coach agrees." "Have you told him that?" "Multiple times." Eli erased something on his worksheet. "He listens. He just doesn't change his mind fast." Vanessa looked at the photograph on the wall. The white dress shirt, the ceremony, whatever it had been. "Eli," she said, "what does your dad talk about? When it's just the two of you?" Eli looked up, surprised by the question. "Airplanes," he said matter-of-factly, "and what I'm reading, and whether I've eaten enough vegetables, which I think is a topic that comes up more than necessary." He paused. "Sometimes he talks about my mom. Not every day, but sometimes." Vanessa said nothing. "She liked it here," Eli said. He said it simply, without the weight that adults put on that category of statement. "Dad says she used to sit on the hood of the truck and watch the small planes come in. He says she could tell the engine sounds apart, like which plane it was just from how it sounded." He looked back at his homework. "I can't do that yet, but I'm working on it." Outside, the helicopter's rotors had shifted pitch. She heard them rise, and then, a moment later, there was the sound of the whole machine lifting. She stood and went to the window. The Bell 206B rose from the pad in a clean, controlled vertical, turned 10 degrees east, and then moved forward in a sweeping arc out over the runway and north toward the hills. It flew straight and level at maybe 300 feet, and she watched it until the sound faded and it was just a shape against the blue. He'd said it would fly by Friday. It was Thursday. She turned from the window. Eli was watching her. "He's good, right?" the boy said, with the particular pride that is wholly different from boasting. "Yes," she said. "He's good." She poured herself a coffee, found the cream in the small refrigerator wedged beside the filing cabinet, which she chose to interpret as either coincidence or something else, and she sat back down and waited, in the quiet of the hangar office, for Noah Bennett to bring the helicopter home. The helicopter came back 22 minutes after it left. She heard it before she saw it. That distinctive turbine note rising from the north, the sound dropping in pitch as the aircraft slowed and descended, and then the Bell 206B settled back onto the pad with the kind of precision that looks effortless from the outside and isn't. Noah touched down without a bounce, without a correction, just a clean arrival, and she understood from watching it that he'd done this 10,000 times in his head before he'd ever done it once with his hands. He ran through the shutdown sequence methodically, rotors slowing, systems going quiet one by one. When he finally climbed out and pulled the headset off, his face held the private expression of a man who has just confirmed something he needed to confirm and found the answer satisfactory. He saw her through the office window, didn't react visibly, just walked toward the door. "You didn't call ahead," he said, coming in. "I needed to review the site before the documentation came through. I told you that." "You told me that," he agreed in the tone of a man who is deciding whether to believe a thing or simply let it stand. He went to the coffee maker, poured a mug, looked at the one already in her hand. "You found the cream," he said. "It was in the refrigerator. I put it there this morning." She looked at him.
He looked back at her and said nothing further, which was worse. In some way she couldn't entirely define, than if he'd said something. Eli had finished his math worksheet and was now lying on the floor with the airplane book again, on his stomach, feet in the air, entirely unbothered by the adult atmosphere in the room. "The tail rotor," Vanessa said. "You said Friday." "Parts came in early."
He sat on the edge of his desk. "Drive shaft was clean once I got it out. Bearing race had pitting. Replaced the assembly, did the rigging adjustment this morning before you got here." "And the test flight?" "Nominal." He drank his coffee. "She's fine." "She." "The helicopter." She noticed that, the way he used the word without affectation, naturally, the way men who live with machines sometimes do. "You rebuilt that yourself," she said. "Most of it. Rick helped with the torque on the mast bolts. He's my A&P mechanic. Comes in 3 days a week." He paused. "I'm licensed too. IA certificate. I just have Rick because 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and the regulations on returning an aircraft to service require an independent sign-off." She looked at the whiteboard, the rotor system schematics that she'd been studying since she sat down. "Noah." She said his name, she realized, for the first time. Neither of them commented on it. "What did you work on at Meridian?" The silence that followed was not angry. It was the silence of someone deciding how much of a room to open. "Propulsion systems," he said. "Turbine integration. Later, some classified work on adaptive flight controls for high-altitude platforms." "High-altitude platforms," she repeated. "UAVs. I can't say specifically, but that's what the DoD award was for." He looked at her steadily. "You did your homework." "I always do my homework." She set her coffee down. "What I don't understand is why it isn't in the room. You run a general aviation field in Shenandoah County, and you have a Department of Defense commendation on your wall, but you introduced yourself by not shaking my hand because of the grease on it." "The grease was real," he said. "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "I don't use it because it's not relevant to what I do now. It was a different chapter." "A chapter you closed?" "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet again. Eli had turned a page in his book. The sound of it was the only sound in the room. "Because some things stop being the point," he said. "And when they do, staying anyway is just stubbornness dressed up as ambition." She sat with that. "Eli was 2, she said. Not a question. She'd done the math from the report. "Eli was 2, he confirmed. "And I was, He stopped. Reconsidered. "I was not doing well. I was flying to D.C. 3 days a week and coming home and eating whatever I could find and putting him to bed, and then sitting in the kitchen not sleeping. And the work was, it was good work, genuinely important work, but I couldn't." He stopped again. He had a particular habit, she was noticing, of stopping before the sentence got to the place he hadn't decided to go yet. "My father was here. He needed help with the field, and it made sense to come back." "It made sense," she said quietly. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Say it like it was a sacrifice. It was a decision. You make decisions. Some of them are right, some of them you're not sure about, and you live inside them and try not to make them feel smaller than they were." He said this without heat, like he'd thought about it enough that the thinking was finished and what was left was just the fact of it. She looked at the window, outside, the concrete pad, the helicopter, the runway catching the morning light. "I looked up your company too," he said. "Blackwell Logistics. You built it from a single regional carrier in, 2018? 2017, she said. 1 truck, 1 route. Richmond to Norfolk. Revenue now is approximately, I'm not going to tell you my revenue. Approximately 400 million, he said. Publicly reported in the trade press. You took 2 rounds of outside investment and bought them out within 3 years. Your current fleet is 61 aircraft, 12 states. He tilted his head. You started when you were 23. 22, she said. I quit my job at 22. First route was 23. What was the job you quit? Junior analyst, investment bank, Baltimore. She said it the way he'd said it made sense, the way you describe a geography you left.
Why'd you quit? Because I was good at it and I hated every day of it, she said. I was good at figuring out where value was being wasted, and I spent all of that talent making other people money and going home to an apartment I could barely afford to feel. She stopped. His habit was apparently contagious. Irrelevant. He was looking at her. She looked back. What did you drive? He asked. I'm sorry? Your first truck. What was it? She almost smiled. Not quite. 2009 Freightliner. Bought it at auction for $11,000. It had a crack in the windshield and the heat didn't work properly on the passenger side. Did you drive it yourself? For the first 6 months, yes. Richmond to Norfolk, Norfolk to Richmond, every day. She paused. I wore the same coat all winter because I needed the money for fuel. He said. She frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means I understand that better than you might expect. Eli had gotten up from the floor without them noticing and was standing at the window, watching the runway with the patient stillness of a child who has spent a lot of time waiting for interesting things to happen in the sky. Dad, he said, not turning around. There's a piper coming in from the south. Noah looked at his watch. That's the Hendersons, Saturday fuel stop. Can I help? Did you finish your worksheet? Yes. Noah looked at Vanessa, and there was something briefly, unguardedly tired in his face. Not unhappy, just the bone-deep weight of a man who manages too many things alone and has gotten good at it and knows that getting good at something isn't the same as it being easy. Go ahead, he said. Don't touch the fuel nozzle until I get out there. Eli was already gone. Noah stood. I need to handle this. It'll take about 10 minutes. I'll come, she said. He looked at her charcoal slacks and her heels and the Virginia summer heat outside the office door. You don't have to. I know, she said. She watched Noah and Eli work the fuel stop with the Henderson aircraft, a blue and white Piper Archer, flown by a man in his 60s with a gray mustache and a wife who brought a Tupperware container of homemade cookies because she had apparently been doing this for 8 years. The cookies, Vanessa gathered from the conversation, were lemon. Eli received his with both hands and ate it in 3 bites. You've got company, Mr. Henderson said to Noah, with a glance at Vanessa that made no effort to be subtle. Business meeting, Noah said, on a Thursday morning at the airfield. Is that unusual? Henderson's mustache moved in a way that suggested he found this very funny. His wife handed Vanessa a cookie without asking, which Vanessa accepted, and she ate the entire thing standing beside a fueling aircraft in 90-degree heat. Very good. You're from the city, Mrs. Henderson said to her. Not accusatory, just placing her. Washington, Vanessa said. Long drive. Worth it for the cookies. Mrs. Henderson looked at her with the specific X-ray gaze of an older woman who has decided to assess someone and sees no reason to pretend otherwise. Then she smiled, which Vanessa took as passing. After the Hendersons taxied out and lifted off, Eli replaced the fuel cap on the service cart with excessive concentration, the way children do tasks they've been told are important. Noah signed the fuel log on a clipboard without looking at the numbers because he clearly already knew them. You have regulars, Vanessa said. We have regulars. He hung the clipboard on the hook inside the cart. Hendersons have been stopping here since before I took over. The Garcias fly in from Roanoke most weekends. We get a lot of student pilots from the Harrisonburg Flight School using us for cross-country practice. He looked out at the runway. About 80 movements a month on average, more in summer. That's more than I expected. Most people expect less. He said it without pride or complaint. The field doesn't advertise. Word of mouth. People who know what they're looking for. She looked at the runway again. 4,200 feet of maintained asphalt, instrument-rated, nestled in a valley between 2 ridgelines with a natural wind funnel that ran almost true north-south. This field, she said slowly, could handle light cargo freight. Easily. Up to about 30,000 pounds payload with the current apron. Expand the turnaround area on the east end. The modification you drew. And you could accommodate turboprop operations without any runway work at all. The surface is rated for it. He turned to face her. I'm not an idiot about what you see here, Vanessa. She noted the name, used naturally. Neither of them commented on it.
I know you see potential that I've been underutilizing, he continued. I'm not blind to that. I've been running this field at a scale that sustains it, not grows it, because growth costs money and takes time, and I've been, the stop, the reconsideration, managing a lot of things at once. Alone, she said. I have Rick. I have good neighbors. Alone, she said again, not unkindly. He was quiet. Eli had found a tennis ball somewhere and was bouncing it off the hangar wall with methodical rhythm, the way a child who has a lot of time in one place learns to fill silence. The documentation is coming to your team tomorrow, Noah said. Everything you asked for. Fuel system specs, drainage reports, structural reports, runway weight ratings, the lot. I know, your email said. Then you don't need to be here today. She looked at him steadily. Do you want me to leave? He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly neutral. No, he said. And then, as if catching himself, there are things about the operation you should see in person that won't show up in documents. Right, she said. I mean that genuinely. I know. They stood there in the heat for a moment with the tennis ball rhythm in the background and the sound of a distant aircraft on approach from the east, and something shifted slightly, the way things shift in the air before weather comes. Not the weather itself, just the first sign that the atmosphere is reorganizing. He showed her the rest of the field that afternoon. Not the documents, not the data. She had all of that coming electronically. He showed her the physical reality of the place in the way you can only do by walking it. The East Taxiway, where the pavement had a section of patched asphalt from a drainage repair 3 years ago, still solid but worth monitoring. The instrument landing system ground equipment in the small concrete shelter near the runway threshold, which he opened with a key from his pocket and explained with the same precision he brought to everything. What it did, when it had been calibrated last, what it would need in the next service cycle. He showed her the older hangar, the smaller one she'd seen on arrival. Inside it smelled of oil and old wood and something she couldn't name, not unpleasant. Under tarps and in various states of disassembly were 2 aircraft she didn't recognize. My father's projects, Noah said. She looked at the nearest one, a single-engine low wing that had clearly been beautiful once and was being, slowly, returned to something. Are you restoring them? Working on it, when there's time. He said this without any sense that time was something he had in abundance. The Stinson is probably 10 years from flying. The Luscombe, he gestured to the other shape under its tarp. Maybe 5, if I get the engine sorted. Your father started them? He started the Stinson. I started the Luscombe. He looked at the shapes under the tarps with an expression she was learning to read. Not the closed-door look, not the careful professional face, but the third one, the one that appeared when he was simply being somewhere and not managing it. He always had 3 things going at once, a project in the air, a project on the ground, and one that was just theoretical. He'd sit at dinner and talk about an airplane he'd read about in a magazine from 1962 like he was going to build it next week. Did he? Never. He liked the thinking of it. A pause. I do the same thing. Eli started doing it about spacecraft. Last week he told me he wants to design a heat shield that works on Mars. He's 7. He might, Vanessa said. He might, Noah agreed. He said it with the quiet certainty of a man who has decided that his job is not to define the limits of what his child becomes. She stood in the old hangar with the smell of oil and old wood and the afternoon light coming through gaps in the corrugated walls and narrow bars. And she thought about a man who drove to Washington 3 times a week and came home and sat in the kitchen not sleeping and made a decision and came back to a valley in Virginia and painted center lines straight because he wanted them straight. Can I ask you something? She said. You've been asking me things all day. Specifically about Claire. He was still for a moment. You don't have to answer. I know. He looked at the tarp-covered Luscombe. What do you want to know? Did she know this place? Vanessa asked. Before, was she from here? He shook his head. She was from Charlottesville. She came here for the first time the summer we started dating. I brought her out on a weekend when my dad needed help with a maintenance project. He almost smiled. She thought she was coming to see an airfield. She ended up under a Cessna with a socket wrench for 6 hours. Did she mind? She was furious at first. Now the smile arrived, brief and real, and aimed at something in the past she couldn't see. Then she got interested in the problem and forgot to be furious. That was Claire. He stopped. Vanessa waited. She died on a Tuesday, he said. I was in a meeting in D.C. By the time I got the call and got to the hospital, he stopped. It was fast, cardiac. Nobody knew she had a condition. She was 29 and she ran half marathons and she had a condition that nobody knew about. He said this not with bitterness, with the flat accuracy of a man who has said it enough times that the saying of it no longer destroys him, but the fact of it never stops being a fact. Eli doesn't remember her, Noah said. Not really. He thinks he does sometimes. He says he remembers a smell. Her shampoo, maybe. But he was 2. He knows her from photographs and from things I tell him. He knows she could identify airplanes by sound. He paused. I tell him the things that made her specific, not general things, the specific ones. Vanessa felt something push against the inside of her chest. She didn't name it. She just let it be there. She liked this field, she said, repeating Eli's words from the morning. She loved this field, Noah said. She said it felt like the edge of something, not the end, the edge, like something was always about to happen. He looked at the light coming through the wall. That was her word, edge. Vanessa thought about that. The runway in the afternoon light, the windsock, the sound of a small aircraft high and distant overhead. The edge of something. Okay, Noah said, with the finality of someone closing a drawer. Not harshly, just done. Let me show you the instrument shelter on the south end. She followed him out of the old hangar into the afternoon heat and didn't say anything else about Claire, which was the right thing to do, and she knew it, and she did it. The document package arrived from Noah's email the following Friday. It was 47 pages, organized with a precision that made her paralegal, who received it first, call Vanessa into her office and say, "This man is not a mechanic." I know, Vanessa said. This is professional-grade infrastructure documentation. The runway weight ratings have load distribution calculations. The fuel system specs include the original engineering drawings and as-built modifications annotated against the originals. There are maintenance logs going back 11 years with cost variance analysis. I know. Did he hire someone to do this? No, Vanessa said. He did it himself. Her paralegal, a methodical woman named Dana, who had been in aviation law for 20 years, looked at the documents again with the expression of someone recalibrating something. The compliance filings alone, Dana said, he's never missed a cycle, not once in 11 years. And the way these environmental monitoring reports are structured, she shook her head slightly. He knows what he's doing. Yes, Vanessa said. He does. She took the documentation to her aviation operations director, a former Air Force logistics officer named Patterson, who had the professional skepticism of a man who had been oversold airfields before. Patterson spent an afternoon with the documents and called her at 6 p.m. Field's exactly what the documentation says it is, Patterson said. Better than in some areas. Whoever did these runway condition assessments knows structural engineering, and the ILS calibration history. He paused, and she could hear him paging through something. This hasn't had a single unscheduled calibration drift in 6 years. Most fields our size have 2 or 3 a year. This is run with a level of technical rigor I'd expect from a major FBO, not a single-owner general aviation field in the middle of Virginia. What's your overall read? She asked. Ideal for what we need, Patterson said. If the owner will deal. He'll deal, she said, on his terms. What are his terms? I'm still finding out. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Vanessa, who is this guy? She was in her office. It was evening, and Washington had gone the particular shade of blue-gray it turned before the lights fully took over. Someone who knows what he's doing, she said, and knows what it's worth. She hung up and looked at the city for a while. Then she called her assistant and rescheduled everything on her Friday calendar. But she drove herself the third time. No Marcus. She got on Route 66 at 6:30 a.m. in her own car, a Mercedes she used maybe twice a month because Washington was walkable and she was usually flying somewhere. and she drove west with the windows down because the morning was cool for August, and the air smelled of grass and something like rain that hadn't arrived yet. She pulled off Route 17 at 8:15. The gate was open. It was always open. Noah was on the runway. Not in an aircraft. He was on foot, walking the center line from the north threshold, holding a clipboard, stopping every 20 yards to make a note, looking at the pavement surface with the specific attention of someone who knows what they're looking for in concrete and isn't going to look away until they find it or confirm it isn't there. He was wearing the same gray work pants, different shirt, dark blue today. She could see from across the apron that his hair was still damp from a shower, which was the first time she had evidence that he showered, which was an absurd thing to notice, and she noticed it anyway. She stayed by the car and watched him work his way down the runway. 100 yards, 200. He stopped, crouched, examined something on the surface, stood, made a note, continued. The field was quiet. The windsock moved gently. 3 swallows were doing something acrobatic above the east taxiway. She could hear her own breathing. He was at the midpoint of the runway when he saw her car. He didn't stop what he was doing. He raised one hand without looking up from the pavement and kept walking. She smiled. She wasn't sure why she smiled. She just did, standing alone in the morning quiet. And then she stopped because there was no particular reason to be standing in a Virginia airfield smiling at a man's back. She went inside and made the coffee. When Noah came in 20 minutes later, he was carrying the clipboard and had a new grease mark on his right forearm from something he'd evidently stopped to deal with on the way back. "Pavement inspection?" she said, handing him coffee. He took it without hesitation, which meant he'd been expecting her, or expecting someone, or had simply decided that coffee handed to him on a Thursday morning was something he would accept from the available universe. "Micro-cracking starting at the 2,000-foot mark," he said. 15-foot section. "I want to seal it before winter." "Is it airworthy as is?" "Yes, but I don't wait for airworthy. I wait for optimal." She looked at him. There was that phrase again, in a different form. "I wanted them straight." "Where's Eli?" she asked. "School," he said. "He started last week, 3rd grade." He said it with the slightly displaced expression of a parent who has sent a child somewhere and isn't sure the world deserves them yet. "Do you drive him?" "Every morning. School's 14 minutes. He sat down. "He talks the whole way, usually about something he's been thinking about since the night before. I get 14 minutes of whatever's been on his mind since 3 a.m. "What was it today?" "Mars," he said. Specifically, whether Martian dust would clog a heat shield's ablative layer during entry. He drank his coffee. "I told him the atmospheric density would affect the dust behavior during the hypersonic phase. He told me to look it up and make sure." She laughed. That same real, uncorporate laugh. He watched her laugh with the same expression as before, the slight surprise of a man who has expected less and received more. "He's going to be something," she said. "Yeah," Noah said. "I know." It came out quiet and not entirely comfortable, and she understood from the way he said it that "I know" wasn't confidence. It was the weight of responsibility, of knowing that something extraordinary is in your care, and knowing you are imperfect, and knowing the gap between those two facts is where all the hardest parenting lives. "You're doing well," she said before she could decide whether to say it. He looked at her, not guarded, not warm, just looking the way he did when he was deciding if something was real. "You've known us for, 3 weeks?" he said. 2.5. "That's not enough time to know how I'm doing. It's enough time to know what I can see," she said, which is a 7-year-old who is curious and kind and comfortable in his own skin. Kids don't get that way by accident. He was quiet for a moment. "He has bad nights sometimes," Noah said. "He doesn't talk about his mom, and then he does, all at once, and sometimes it's midnight, and we end up sitting on the hangar steps." He looked at his coffee. "I don't always know what to say. I just sit there with him. Sometimes I think I'm not enough, and I don't know how to fix that." "That's called being a parent," she said. "How would you know?" She looked at him. He held her gaze. "Fair point," she said. "I'm not trying to—" "No, you're right," she said. "I don't know. I'm 30 and I live in a city by myself, and the last plant I owned died in 2022, and I'm not sure I noticed for 2 weeks." She said this with the particular honesty that emerges sometimes in the morning, in quiet places, when guard is down. I was making an observation, not a claim. He nodded slowly. The observation wasn't wrong, he said. That's why I pushed back. She looked at him. He looked back. The coffee maker had gone quiet. Noah, she said, I want to make this work, the partnership. I want it to be real. He set his mug down. What does real mean to you? It means I don't use this airfield. I grow it. It means whatever we build here carries your name on it, not mine. It means I put in the capital and the roots and the operational structure, and you keep doing what you're already doing, which is running the best maintained small airfield I've ever seen documentation for. And we build something that's worth more than either of us could do alone. He was quiet long enough that she heard a bird outside. A long call, then silence. And if I say no to parts of what you're proposing, he said, if there are pieces that don't fit what I've built here, then we negotiate, she said, like adults. And neither of us pretends the other doesn't have a point. He picked up his mug again, looked at it, set it down. Okay, he said. She waited for more. Okay, she said. Okay, let's make it real. He stood up and went to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. But we start with the East Apron expansion because if you're going to run cargo ops through here, you need the turnaround geometry fixed first. And I want that in writing before anything else. She opened her briefcase and found a legal pad. They worked for 3 hours. No lawyers present, no assistants. Just the two of them at the whiteboard, and the coffee maker that ran twice, and the morning turning into afternoon outside while they argued, genuinely, substantively argued, over apron dimensions and fuel capacity thresholds and the language of a maintenance access clause that she thought was too broad and he thought was too narrow, and they ended up somewhere in between that neither of them had arrived at alone. At one point she crossed out something he'd written and he looked at it and said, "You're right, that doesn't work." At another point, he told her that a tonnage figure she'd proposed for the runway weight limit clause was based on outdated FAA advisory material, and he produced, from the desk drawer, a printed copy of the current advisory circular with the relevant section highlighted, which meant he had anticipated that specific disagreement in advance, and she looked at the highlighted section and said, "Fine, fine, you're right," in the tone of a person who finds being right annoying. He smiled at that. A real one. Not the corner of the mouth near smile she'd seen before. An actual smile. Brief and a little tired and entirely genuine. And she looked at it for about 1 second longer than she looked at most things and then looked back at the legal pad. By 2 o'clock, the legal pad had 23 pages of notes, and the whiteboard had been erased and rewritten twice. By 2:15, Noah's phone buzzed twice, and he looked at it and said, "I have to get Eli in 40 minutes. "I should head back anyway," she said. She began gathering the legal pad pages into order. He was erasing the whiteboard. "Vanessa," he said. She looked up. "Are you in Washington this weekend?" She had a board call on Saturday. She had a dinner with her CFO on Sunday. She had approximately 11 things that constituted a full professional weekend. "Why?" she said. "Eli's soccer game is Saturday morning. He's been asking—" He stopped. A brief version of the stop. "He mentioned you. He asked if you knew what position he actually plays." She thought about the boy's face. Multiple times. He just doesn't change his mind fast. "Midfield," she said. Noah looked at her. "You remembered." He was very clear about it. He turned back to the whiteboard and finished erasing. His back was to her when he said, "It's at 9. The field is in town. I can text you the address if you want." She looked at the back of his head, the damp hair, long dry now, the width of his shoulders, the grease on his right forearm. "Text me the address," she said. He didn't turn around. "Okay." She picked up her briefcase and her legal pad, walked to the door, and then stopped. "Noah." He turned. "He was right about the heat shield," she said. "I looked it up on the drive down. Martian dust during hypersonic entry. It's actually a significant design challenge. There's a paper from JPL from last year." He stared at her. "I'll send him the link," she said. "If that's okay." He was quiet for a moment, and his face did the thing it sometimes did. the guarded part going still, the underneath of it briefly visible. "Yeah," he said. "That's okay." She left. She was halfway back to Washington before she realized she was still smiling, and this time she didn't stop. Eli played midfield. He was not the fastest kid on the field, and he knew it, and he had apparently decided this was not relevant information. What he had instead was an instinct for where the ball was going to be, which is a different thing entirely from speed, and Vanessa watched him from the sideline on a folding chair that Noah had produced from the back of his truck and set up for her without asking, and she watched Eli read the field the way his father read a runway, with the particular attention of someone who had been paying attention long enough to understand what they were looking at. Noah stood beside her. He did not sit. He stood with his arms folded and watched his son with an expression of complete concentration, like he was running calculations. "He sees the gaps," Vanessa said. "Yeah." Noah didn't look at her. "He's been doing that since he was 5. I used to put cones out on the apron and he'd move through them. He wasn't fast then either, but he never hit a cone." Eli intercepted a pass in the midfield third and turned with it cleanly, looked up, found a teammate wide on the left, a pass that Vanessa could see was slightly too heavy but carried the right idea, and ran forward into the space he'd just created, which was empty because no one else had seen it was going to be empty. "There," Noah said quietly. The play didn't result in a goal. The ball went out. But both of them had seen what Eli had seen, and neither of them said anything, and the moment sat between them in the morning air. "He told me about the JPL paper," Noah said after a while. "Did he like it?" "He printed it and highlighted things." He paused. "He's 7. He shouldn't be able to highlight relevant passages in an aerospace engineering paper." He highlighted passages, 3 of them, and wrote a question in the margin. Another pause. "I couldn't answer the question." She looked at him. "Don't tell him that," Noah added. "I won't." She looked back at the field. "What was the question?" He asked why the paper's proposed solution used an aluminum oxide matrix instead of a carbon-carbon composite, and whether the weight penalty was justified given Mars's lower gravity. He said this with the flat expression of a man who has accepted that his child is becoming something he can't fully keep up with, and has decided to love that rather than fear it. She stared at him. "He's 7, she said. "I know." They watched the second half in a companionable quiet that felt, to Vanessa, like something she'd had to grow into without noticing she was growing. Around them, other parents talked. Phones came out. One father behind them spent 10 minutes on a call that had nothing to do with the game. Vanessa sat in her folding chair and watched Eli play midfield and didn't check her phone once, which had not happened at a non-work event in longer than she could reliably measure. Eli's team lost, 3-2. He came off the field with the specific expression of a child who is disappointed but processing it in real time and working through to something like acceptance. "Good game," Noah said. "We lost," Eli said. "I know, good game." Eli looked at him for a moment, then looked at Vanessa. "Did you see the pass in the second half?" he asked. "The one to Marcus on the left?" "I did," she said. "You saw the space before it opened." He considered this. It almost worked. "Almost is not nothing," she said. He thought about that for a moment, the way he thought about things that interested him, fully, without embarrassment. Then he nodded once and went to get his water bottle. Noah looked at her. "He's going to remember you said that." "Good," she said, and meant it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Noah was in the middle of a fuel log entry when he heard the gravel pop under a vehicle he didn't recognize. Not a regular. The regulars he knew by engine sound and timing. This was a black SUV, clean, government plates, and it pulled up to the office door in the particular way that official vehicles pull up, which is to say, like they're allowed to park wherever they want. 2 people got out. A man in a gray suit and a woman in a FAA field inspector's vest. The man was carrying a folder. Noah set down his pen. "Mr. Bennett," the man said. "Yes." "Dale Whitfield, Regional Compliance Division. This is Inspector Torres from the FAA Safety Office." He extended the folder. "We've received a complaint against this facility, and we're here to initiate a preliminary review under 14 CFR, Part 139. Noah took the folder.
He didn't open it immediately. He looked at Whitfield. "What kind of complaint?" he said. "Multiple items," Torres said. "Fuel system integrity, runway surface compliance, and, this is the significant one, allegation of falsified maintenance records going back approximately 3 years." Noah was very still for a moment. "Falsified maintenance records," he repeated. "That's the allegation," Whitfield said carefully. "We're not here to—" "Who filed the complaint?" Whitfield and Torres exchanged a brief look that told him everything he needed to know about whether they were going to answer that question. "We're not in a position to disclose the complainant at this stage," Whitfield said. Noah opened the folder. He read it standing in the sun on the concrete apron, while Whitfield explained the process and Torres made notes on a clipboard.
He read it the way he read technical documents, systematically, without rushing, hitting each item and indexing it against what he knew. The fuel system allegation cited a specific date in April of the prior year. The runway surface allegation referenced a section of the pavement he knew exactly, the micro-cracking he'd identified and flagged, and hadn't yet sealed because the sealant contractor was backed up through September. The maintenance records allegation was more general, citing irregularities in the certification documentation for the Bell 206B. He looked up when he finished. "The Bell 206B, he said. "I want to be very specific about this. I am a licensed A&P mechanic with an inspection authorization. Every return to service on that aircraft has been co-signed by my IA certified mechanic, Rick Gallardo, whose license is current and whose work you can verify directly with the FAA's Airmen Registry. Every document is in the filing cabinet in that office, organized by aircraft date and work order number. I can have the full record on this table in 10 minutes. Mr. Bennett, the fuel system issue from April." He didn't raise his voice. He just kept going, steadily. "I have the inspection log, the nozzle calibration certificate, and the fuel sample test results from that month, all clear. The runway surface flagging, I found that section myself during my own inspection 6 weeks ago and documented it. You will find my own inspection report in the maintenance file with a photo survey and a notation that I've scheduled sealing for October." He paused. "Whoever told you there's a problem with this airfield either has incorrect information or is providing you with information they know to be incorrect." Torres was looking at him with a slightly different expression now, not softer exactly. She was a regulator. Soft wasn't in the job description, but more careful, like she was recalibrating what kind of meeting this was. "We'll need to do a full inspection," she said. "That's standard process once a complaint is filed." "I understand," Noah said. "Schedule it. Come whenever you want. Bring whoever you need to bring. Everything you need to verify is here, documented, and accurate." He handed the folder back to Whitfield. "Now," he said, "do you need anything else today, or would you like to come inside and I'll get you the fuel system documentation so you can start?" He called Vanessa from the office after the inspectors left, while he was pulling the maintenance binders from the filing cabinet to photograph and send to his records backup. She picked up on the second ring. "Someone filed a complaint against the field," he said. A short silence. "What kind of complaint?" he told her. She listened without interrupting, which was something he'd noticed about her in the good quality moments. She didn't fill silence with talking when the talking wasn't hers yet. "Do you know who?" she said when he finished. "They wouldn't say." He pulled the April fuel log binder. "I have a guess." "Harlan Croft," she said. He stopped. "You know about Croft?" he said. "He's been trying to acquire land along the Route 17 corridor for 2 years. His development company has a preliminary commercial permit application with Shenandoah County for a distribution and transshipment terminal. The footprint of his proposed development," a pause, brief, like she was pulling something up, "overlaps with your eastern parcel." Noah sat down. "How do you know this?" "Because when I identify an asset I want to partner with, I find out who else wants it," she said. "Croft approached your field 18 months ago. You turned him down." "I turned him down twice," Noah said. "First time he offered $4 million, second time, $7. And the third time?" "There was no third time. His assistant sent an email and I didn't reply." "So he found another approach," Vanessa said quietly. "Apparently." Noah looked at the binders stacked on his desk. 11 years of documentation. Every entry logged, dated, cross-referenced.
It won't hold up. None of what he's alleging is accurate. I know, she said. But Noah, a regulatory review takes time. And if Croft knows anything about how these processes work, he knows that a pending investigation creates a cloud over the property. It makes it harder to sign new agreements. It delays permits. It creates exactly the kind of uncertainty that makes a landowner reconsider their options. He understood what she was saying. He thinks I'll sell, Noah said. He thinks the pressure will make it easier. A pause. Will it? He looked at the window, the runway, the windsock. No, he said. Then we need to prepare, she said. I'm coming tomorrow, and I'm bringing Dana, your paralegal. She's also an aviation attorney. I didn't mention that. He was quiet for a moment. You didn't mention that. I mention things when they're relevant, she said. They're relevant now. He heard something in her voice that he hadn't heard before. Not quite anger, and not exactly protectiveness, but something in the neighborhood of both. Vanessa, he said. Yeah. This might complicate things for you, for Blackwell. A compliance review on a property you're in active partnership negotiations with. I know, she said. I know how it could look, she said. I don't care how it looks. I care whether it's right. A brief silence. Do you have everything documented? All of it? Every piece. Good, she said. I'll be there at 8. She was there at 7:40. Dana arrived at 8:15, a thin woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular energy of someone who has been underestimated in courtrooms enough times to find it mildly entertaining. She shook Noah's hand, sat down at his desk without being invited, opened the first maintenance binder, and began reading. She read for an hour and 15 minutes. She made marks on a legal pad in a handwriting that was completely illegible to anyone but herself. She asked Noah 3 questions during that time, precise questions, and he answered them precisely, and she made more marks. Then she took off her glasses and looked at the stack of binders. This, she said, is the cleanest facility record I have seen in 20 years of aviation compliance work. Thank you, Noah said. That wasn't a compliment, she said. That was an observation. Compliments are for people who need them. This, she tapped the binders, is a legal fortress. This is someone who knew, on some level, that this moment would come eventually and built for it. She looked at Noah. You always documented this carefully, she said. My father did, he said. I kept his system and added to it. Add your father's records to the disclosure package, she said immediately. Original ownership history, his maintenance logs, whatever he kept. We want to show a continuous chain of professional stewardship going back to the field's establishment. He kept everything, Noah said. I have his records from 1978 forward in the old hangar. Dana put her glasses back on. Get them. He got them. They spent the rest of the morning cataloging, photographing, and organizing. Vanessa worked beside Noah, lifting binders, sorting dates, finding the original FAA registration documents in a water-stained manila folder that had been sitting in a file box since 1984. She handled the old papers carefully, the way you handle things that matter. At one point, her hand found a photograph that had slipped between 2 folders. A man standing beside a Cessna, squinting into the sun, one hand resting on the wing. An older man, broad-shouldered, with Noah's jaw, and an expression of uncomplicated satisfaction. She held it out to Noah. He looked at it for a second. My dad, he said. Early 80s. That's the Cessna he used for the flight school. He ran lessons on weekends for about 15 years. He looks happy, she said. He was always happy when he was near an airplane. He took the photograph gently, looked at it for a moment longer, then set it on the edge of the desk rather than back in the box. She noticed that. She didn't say anything. Harlan Croft was not the kind of man who made his moves in person. He was 61, operated from a glass and marble office in McLean, and had a team of people whose function was to ensure that whatever he wanted to happen eventually happened without him appearing to have pushed. His development company, Croft Capital Holdings, had a portfolio of 17 commercial projects across Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. He wore suits that cost more than Noah's truck. He had, Vanessa knew from her network, contributed to the campaigns of 4 sitting state legislators, which was not a coincidence and was not meant to look like one. She knew Harlan Croft. Not personally. by reputation and by the pattern of how he operated. She found out he'd been briefed on her partnership negotiations with Noah 2 weeks after the complaint was filed. One of her board members mentioned it, casually, at a lunch she'd been dreading anyway. "Word is you're in talks with that Bennett Field," the board member said. "Hargrove Road." "We're in discussions," she said. "Croft's been watching that property." The board member, a man named Arthur Presley, who had the permanent expression of someone who found everything mildly disappointing, cut his salmon. "He's not going to like the competition." "He's not my concern," she said. "He has relationships with the county supervisors," Presley said, "and the regional FAA district manager is a man named Fowler who Croft has." "Arthur," she set her fork down, "if you're about to suggest that I should be concerned about Harlan Croft's political connections to the point where it affects my business decisions, this is going to be a short lunch." Presley looked at her over his glasses. "I'm suggesting you be aware of the landscape."
"I'm aware of the landscape," she said. "I've been aware of it since the complaint was filed, and I've been working with legal to prepare the disclosure package. The Airfield's documentation is airtight. The complaint will not survive a formal inspection." "And if Croft escalates?" "Then we escalate back," she said, "and I'm better capitalized." She picked up her fork. Presley was quiet for a moment. "You're personally invested in this," he said. "I'm professionally invested in a strategic asset," she said. "Vanessa." He had the particular tone of an older man who thinks he's being insightful. "I've been on your board for 4 years. I've watched you negotiate acquisitions from here to Atlanta. You don't get that look for strategic assets." "What look?" she said. He just looked at her, which was answer enough, and she did not dignify it further, and they talked about the quarterly numbers for the rest of lunch. And she drove back to her office and sat at her desk and stared at the Washington skyline and didn't think about what he'd said. She thought about it for about an hour. Then she called Noah. "The complaint came from Croft's operation," she said. "I don't have proof, but I'm sure." "I figured," Noah said. "He has relationships with county supervisors and possibly someone in the FAA district office." A silence. "How possibly?" Noah said. "Possibly enough that we shouldn't wait for the formal inspection to build our case. Dana's filing a preemptive disclosure request, submitting our full documentation package to the FAA's regional office directly, voluntarily, before the inspection date. It puts everything on the record and removes the advantage of the surprise inspection dynamic. Can she do that?" "She already did it this morning," Vanessa said. "She sent a 47-page voluntary compliance disclosure with a cover letter that is, and I'm quoting her directly, aggressively polite." Another silence. "I want to see that cover letter," Noah said. "It's very good," Vanessa said. She used the phrase, "we welcome the opportunity," 4 times in 4 different tones. For a moment, she heard something that might have been a laugh, brief, real. "Vanessa," he said. "Yeah. You didn't have to do this." "I know I didn't have to." "The timeline on our agreement, this pushes everything back. Your cargo route permits depend on the field status being clear. This costs you time, and I know what it costs me," she said. "I'm still here." The silence this time was different from the professional silences. It was the kind of silence that means something is being received. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'll call Rick and make sure he's available for the inspection date. He'll want to be there for the Bell Records review specifically." "Good. And Noah?" She stopped. "Yeah." "Eli. Does he know anything about this?" A pause. "No. I don't want him. He's 8 next month. He doesn't need to be carrying this." "Right," she said. "Then we keep it that way until it's resolved." "That's the plan. Is he still thinking about the heat shield?" A brief pause at the transition in conversation, and then, "He's moved on to orbital insertion mechanics. He printed something from NASA's website and left it on my pillow." "On your pillow?" "He wanted to make sure I read it before bed." She sat in her office chair and looked at the city and felt something warm and strange moving through her chest that she was going to have to think about sometime, just not right now. "Good night, Noah," she said. "Good night, Vanessa." Sobbed. The inspection was scheduled for a Thursday in late September, 6 weeks after the complaint was filed. Torres came back, this time with 2 additional FAA field inspectors and a structural engineer from the regional office. Whitfield from the compliance division came too, with a different folder. They arrived at 9 a.m. Noah was already outside when they pulled in. He had been there since 7. He was wearing the same gray pants, a clean shirt, and he had, for the first time since Vanessa had known him, done something about his hair, which meant it was brushed rather than not brushed, which was not a large change, but it was a change. Vanessa was there too. She stood slightly to Noah's left, 1 step behind, not hiding, not taking over, just present. She wore a suit she'd chosen carefully, not aggressive, not soft. She wanted to read as someone who had shown up because she believed in what she was showing up for. Dana was there. She stood in the shade of the office doorway with her legal pad and her illegible notes and the expression of a woman who has already read every document 3 times and found no errors and knows it. Rick Gallardo was there. He was a compact man in his 60s, former military maintenance, with the particular stillness of people who have spent decades working on aircraft and understand that stillness is a professional virtue. He had his own license records, his own copies of every co-signed return-to-service documentation, organized in a binder he'd put together himself without being asked. Torres walked through the gate and stopped when she saw the assembled group. "Good morning," Noah said. "Mr. Bennett?" She looked at the group. "You brought backup." "I brought the people who do the actual work," he said. "Rick is my A&P mechanic. He co-signed every aircraft release on record. My attorney is here if there are procedural questions. And Ms. Blackwell is here as interested party," Vanessa said. "We're in active partnership negotiations. The status of this field is relevant to my business operations." Torres looked at her for a moment, then at Noah. Then she said, "Let's start with the fuel system." They went to the fuel system. It took 4 hours. The inspectors moved through the field methodically. Fuel infrastructure, runway surface, drainage, instrument shelter, hangar facilities, aircraft records. At each stop, Noah produced documentation before they asked for it. Not in a defensive way. In the way of a man who knows where everything is because he put it there and has always known where it was. The runway surface section she'd flagged for sealing, the micro cracking at the 2,000-foot mark, was the only point of real discussion. Torres looked at it, looked at Noah's inspection report from 6 weeks prior, looked at the contractor scheduling confirmation for October. "You identified this yourself," she said. "During a routine surface inspection," he said. "I do them monthly." "And you documented it. The day I found it." She was quiet, standing on the runway in the September heat, looking at the section of pavement. The cracks were there, real, minor, exactly what his report described them as. "This doesn't meet the threshold for airworthiness concern," she said finally. "It's a maintenance item. Your proactive identification and scheduling is appropriate." "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. It's just accurate." The Bell 206B records were the last item. Rick sat across from one of the inspectors at the desk in the office and went through the file line by line. Eli's moving blanket was still folded in the corner. The airplane book was on the shelf now. Vanessa had put it there on one of her visits, off the floor, and it had stayed there. Noah stood near the whiteboard. He was not tense, exactly, but he was holding himself in a particular way, the way a person holds themselves when they are waiting for the conclusion of something they have been working toward for a long time. The inspector finished the records review, made notes, looked at Rick. "Certification documentation for the return to service in July," he said. "Your signature and Mr. Bennett's. Both IA certified." "Both current," Rick said, and produced his own license documentation without being asked. The inspector looked at it, made a note. "Okay," he said. That was it. Okay. 2 letters. Torres consolidated with the other inspectors in the doorway, while Noah and Vanessa stood by the desk and said nothing. Vanessa could feel his arm near hers, not touching, just near. She was aware of it. Torres came back in. "We'll file our report within 10 business days," she said. "Based on what we've seen today, I'm not anticipating any compliance findings of substance. The fuel system is within specifications. The runway surface item is properly documented and scheduled. The aircraft records are... She paused, and something moved across her face that might have been as close as she came to impressed comprehensive. She looked at Noah. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "for what it's worth, and I know it doesn't address what's happened here, this is the best documented small airfield I've inspected in 15 years. Noah said nothing for a moment. "My father started the system," he said. "I just kept it going." Torres nodded once, picked up her things. When they left, the gravel under the SUVs popping as they turned back onto the access road, Noah stood in the office doorway and watched them go. His hands were in his pockets. His back was to Vanessa and Dana and Rick. Rick clapped him once on the shoulder and said, "Good," and went out to the hangar because Rick was a man of precisely calibrated word counts. Dana gathered her legal pad and said something about filing a response brief to the complaint division and excused herself. And then it was just Vanessa and Noah in the office, and the sound of a small piper on final approach from the west, and the windsock moving in a light afternoon breeze. "It worked," she said. "Yeah," he said. He turned around. He looked tired. Not defeated tired, the other kind. The tired that comes after a sustained period of holding something up that needed holding, and finally being able to put it down. "Croft's not done," he said. "No," she agreed. "He's not. This was a first move. When it doesn't work, he'll find another angle." "He might," she said, "but he's going to find out that the second move costs him more than the first one did." She paused. "I've been in business for 8 years. I've dealt with men like Croft. They do well against targets who are isolated and underfunded and alone." She looked at him steadily. "You're none of those things." He looked at her. The piper on final was getting louder, dropping below the tree line to the west, and in a moment they heard the wheels touch the runway and the engine note change as it slowed. "Vanessa," Noah said. She waited. He crossed the office in 3 steps and took her face in his hands, work-rough hands, careful, and kissed her, once, with the particular quality of a thing that has been decided rather than arrived at, impulsively. Her hands found the front of his shirt. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. He pulled back, looked at her. He looked, for the first time in all the weeks she'd known him, genuinely uncertain. "I've been thinking about doing that for a while," he said. "I know," she said. "Is that Noah?" She looked at him. "Yes." He exhaled. Not quite a laugh. Something close. She still had his shirt in her hands. She realized it and let go, which she immediately wished she hadn't done, and he seemed to notice that because the corner of his mouth moved. "The piper's going to need to refuel," he said. "Go," she said. He went. She stood in the office with the afternoon light coming through the window at its long September angle, and the sound of him outside talking to whoever had just landed, the easy professional exchange of a man in the place where he belongs. She looked at the photograph on the wall, the white dress shirt, the ceremony, the man he had been before the decision, before the runway, before the center lines. She looked at the photograph of his father on the desk. She'd moved it there herself weeks ago, from where it had ended up on a filing cabinet, and Noah had never put it back, which she took as permission. She sat down in the chair that had become, over the past months, implicitly hers. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to her assistant. "Push everything tomorrow. I'm staying in Virginia tonight." Then she sat in the quiet and listened to Noah Bennett talk to the Piper's pilot about fuel and weather and the wind direction, his voice carrying through the thin wall, professional and calm and entirely at home. And she thought about the edge of something. That was the word Claire had used, apparently. Standing on the edge of something, where something was always about to happen. For the first time in Vanessa's life, she understood exactly what that meant. She stayed 3 nights. This had not been the plan. The plan, such as it was, had been to stay through dinner and drive back to Washington in the evening with the windows down and the radio on and the particular feeling of someone who has done something right and is carrying it home. That was the plan. What happened instead was that Noah made dinner, pasta, from scratch, not from a box, which surprised her, though she didn't say so. And Eli came home from his after-school program with a drawing he'd done in art class that he wanted to show her specifically. And she looked at it, a detailed pencil sketch of a rocket with what appeared to be highly accurate staging separations. And she told him it was exceptional, and he told her which part he wasn't happy with. And they sat at the kitchen table talking about it while Noah cooked, and by the time the food was on the table, the sun was already gone, and the drive back to Washington in the dark didn't make the same kind of sense it had made an hour earlier. "The couch pulls out," Noah said. Not an invitation exactly, just a fact he was making available. "Okay," she said. It was not a romantic arrangement. The pull-out couch had a bar in the middle that she could feel through the mattress, and the blanket smelled like fabric softener and old cotton and faintly like the hanger. And at some point around 2 in the morning, she heard Eli get up for water and pad back to his room, and she lay in the dark listening to the silence of a house that slept differently from any apartment she'd ever occupied. The silence here had things in it. The refrigerator hum, wind against the north side of the building. Occasional sounds from the hangar. She'd learned the difference between the structural sounds a metal building makes at night and something actually happening. These were structural. She lay there and thought about how she was 30 years old and had built a company that moved freight across 12 states, and she had never once slept this well in her own bed. She was back in Washington by noon the next day. She told her assistant she'd been doing site reconnaissance, which was true enough, but she left her coffee mug at the airfield, on the desk, beside the photograph of Noah's father. She did not go back specifically to retrieve it. It just stayed there. And the next time she came, it was still there, and she used it again. And after that, it was simply the mug she used at the airfield, and neither of them mentioned it, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The FAA report came back in 9 business days. No compliance findings. The language in the report was measured and official, but between its lines, if you knew how to read regulatory prose, and Dana did, it was a quiet repudiation of every item in Croft's complaint. The fuel system was compliant. The runway surface item was properly managed. The aircraft maintenance records were, in the report's own language, thorough and professionally maintained beyond standard requirements. Dana sent the report to Vanessa with a single line. "Told you." Vanessa forwarded it to Noah with no message. He replied 20 minutes later. "Good. Sealing the runway section Thursday. Rick says the contractor does good work." She smiled at her phone. Her CFO, who was sitting across from her in a budget review, noticed and said nothing, because he'd learned that when Vanessa smiled at her phone during meetings, it was either very good news or personal, and in either case, it was not his territory. Then she opened a second email. This one was from Donna, sent 30 minutes after the first. Croft filed a second complaint. Zoning challenge this time. Alleges the proposed cargo expansion would violate Shenandoah County agricultural zoning regulations. Not FAA. County Planning Commission. Different process, different fight. Call me. She called. "He moved faster than I expected," Dana said. "He was ready," Vanessa said. "The FAA complaint was always meant to be the first move. He had this queued up." The zoning challenge has more legs than the maintenance complaint did. The county agricultural zoning code in that district is genuinely ambiguous about aviation commercial operations. It's been contested before. There's a 2009 case involving a crop dusting operation that went to the state circuit court. What happened in 2009? The field won, but it took 14 months. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. 14 months. Minimum, Dana said. And Croft has a relationship with at least 2 of the 5 county supervisors. The Planning Commission reports to the supervisors. If this goes to a full hearing, the political landscape is not neutral. What do we need? We need a land use attorney. We need the original Airfield zoning documentation from 1978. And we need to demonstrate that aviation commercial operations are not an incompatible use under the existing zoning designation, which, if the 1978 registration was properly filed, may actually be provable. The 1978 documentation, Vanessa said, we found it in the disclosure package, the original FAA registration, and the county land use permit. Get me the county permit specifically, Dana said, and whatever was filed with the Planning Commission when the airfield was first established. If Noah's father got a commercial operations waiver at founding, even an informal one, we use that as precedent. She hung up and called Noah immediately. He picked up on the 3rd ring. She could hear the runway sealing contractor in the background, the low rumble of equipment, someone calling measurements. He filed a zoning challenge, she said. A pause, in which the contractor sounds continued. When? Noah said. This morning. Dana just got it. Another pause. Agricultural zoning. You knew it was a possibility. I knew it was a possibility, he confirmed. My father dealt with a version of this in the late 80s. The county tried to restrict night operations. He had the original permit language reviewed and it held. He paused. The 1978 county permit. The one in the blue folder. Dana needs it. It's in the filing cabinet, second drawer behind the FAA registration. Blue folder, my dad's handwriting on the tab. He was quiet for a moment. Vanessa, there's a notation on the permit. I don't know if it's relevant, but there's a handwritten notation on the last page where the county planning officer signed off. My dad talked about it once. He said the officer, a man named Garland, who's been dead for 30 years, wrote a note acknowledging that the airfield's commercial operations were consistent with agricultural support use under the county's own rural development guidelines. It's informal, but it's dated and signed. She processed this. That's precedent, she said. That's contemporary precedent from the original approval. Maybe, he said. Dana would know better than me. I'll get the folder and drive it to her today. You don't have to drive it. You can photograph shots. I'll drive it, she said. I want to see it myself. He didn't argue. There's coffee in the maker, he said. Eli's at school until 3. I know Eli's schedule, she said. A brief pause, and she could hear something in it. Not exactly warmth, but the particular quality of a man who is beginning to trust something, and is still getting used to that being safe. Yeah, he said. I know you do. She found the blue folder in the second drawer behind the FAA registration, exactly where he'd said it would be. She sat at the desk and read it before photographing anything. The original county land use permit was 4 pages, typed on a manual typewriter dated March 1978. It authorized the establishment of an aviation facility on the Bennett parcel for the purpose of general aviation operations, including fuel sales, maintenance services, and flight instruction. The language was the measured bureaucratic language of 1970s county planning. A little formal, a little vague in the ways that documents from that era were vague. And then the last page. The planning officer's signature, one Harold B. Garland, and in the margin, in small, careful handwriting, operations as described are consistent with agricultural support use under Section 7.4b of the County Rural Development Guidelines and are not in conflict with existing agricultural zoning designation. This determination reflects the Commission's finding that aviation services in rural districts have historically supported the agricultural community and should be considered compatible use. She read it twice. Harold B. Garland had been thorough. He had, 30 years before anyone needed him to, written down exactly the argument they needed to make. She photographed every page with her phone. Then she sat at the desk for a moment with the folder in her hands and thought about a man she'd never met who had built a runway with borrowed equipment and apparently kept every piece of paper that had ever touched his property. And she felt something that was close to gratitude and not entirely unlike grief for the loss of someone she'd never known. She called Dana. I have it, she said. I'm sending photos now. At a pause while Dana received them. Then, oh, that's very good. Garland's notation. Yes. Dana's voice had shifted to its professional satisfaction register. Section 7.4b. If that section is still in the current county code, even in amended form, this notation creates a contemporaneous administrative interpretation of compatible use that predates the complaint by 47 years. Croft's challenge assumes there's ambiguity. Garland resolved that ambiguity in 1978. Is 7.4b still in the code? I'm pulling it now. A keyboard. A long pause. It's been renumbered. It's now Section 9.2a. The language has been updated, but the underlying principle, rural compatible use, is preserved. Another pause. Vanessa, this is very good. This isn't a 14-month fight. This might be a 60-day fight if we move fast. Move fast, Vanessa said. Already am, Dana said. I need a land use attorney to co-file.
I have someone in Harrisonburg who knows the Shenandoah County Commission. Get them. Expensive. I know, Vanessa said. You're covering this? She looked at the blue folder. Noah's father's handwriting on the tab, the faded type on the pages inside. Yes, she said. I'm covering it.
She told Noah that evening. He was quiet for a long moment. They were standing on the concrete apron in the last light, because Noah had a habit of being outside at this hour that she'd started sharing without entirely meaning to. The air was cooling. October was settling into the valley. You don't have to pay for it, he said. I know. I can cover the legal fees. It'll take time, but… Noah. She turned to look at him. You have a 47-year-old permit with a planning officer's notation that essentially solves the problem. What you need is a land use attorney and time, and Dana can manage both. I can fund the attorney. It's not a gift. It's an operational investment in a field I intend to partner with. He looked at the runway, hands in his pockets. You keep reframing things as operational investments, he said. Because they are. Some of them, he said. She didn't say anything. Some of them are something else, he said, still looking at the runway. Yes, she said. Some of them are. He turned and looked at her then, and she looked back, and it was one of those moments that doesn't need to be extended or explained. It just needed to exist and be recognized by both people simultaneously, which it was. Eli asked me something last night, Noah said. What? He asked if you were going to keep coming here. He said it with the particular careful neutrality of a parent reporting a child's question without editorializing. What did you say? She asked. I said I thought so. He paused. He said good, because he wanted to show you something about the Stinson restoration. He's been reading about it. He's been reading about the Stinson restoration, she repeated. He found one of my father's restoration manuals in the old hangar and took it to his room. He's been in there most evenings with a flashlight going over it. Noah shook his head slightly. He's 8. He shouldn't be able to follow a restoration manual. Does he? He asked me yesterday why the original wing fabric was grade A cotton and not something synthetic. I told him synthetics weren't approved for that airframe. He said, and this is a direct quote, but the tensile strength differential would argue for synthetic on the outer panels at least, wouldn't it? She stared at him. He's 8, she said. I'm aware, Noah said. She looked out at the runway, the center lines, white on gray, running straight and clean into the falling dark. Show me the Stinson sometime, she said. He looked at her. He's going to make you read the manual. I'll read the manual, she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, okay, but the zoning challenge hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. Dana filed the opposition brief in the first week of October. 22 pages, supported by the 1978 permit, the Garland notation, the 2009 Circuit Court precedent, and a detailed analysis of Section 9.2a of the current county code. She co-filed with the Harrisonburg land use attorney, a woman named Carol Yee, who had argued 3 cases before the Shenandoah County Planning Commission and had won 2 of them. The third one, she told Vanessa over the phone, she had lost because one of the supervisors had a financial relationship with the opposing developer that hadn't been disclosed until after the ruling. Does that pattern suggest anything about this hearing? Vanessa asked. It suggests we go in assuming nothing, Yee said, and make the legal argument so clean that political considerations become embarrassing to act on. Can you do that? The Garland notation helps enormously, Yee said. Contemporary administrative interpretation is powerful precedent. Croft's attorneys are going to argue that the notation is informal and non-binding. We're going to argue that a county planning officer's signed contemporaneous finding in the original permit file is the most binding thing in the room. A pause. It's a good argument. Win it, Vanessa said. Yee made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yes, ma'am. In the 6 weeks between the filing and the hearing, the airfield expanded in small but real ways. The East Apron modification, which the one Noah had drawn on the whiteboard back in August, the turning radius adjustment that would allow cargo aircraft to maneuver without conflict, was designed and permitted. Noah did the engineering drawings himself, which saved a significant amount in fees, and the county road department approved the access modification in 3 weeks, which was faster than anyone expected and which Noah attributed to a planning officer named Debs, who had learned to fly at the field 20 years ago and had never forgotten it. Vanessa's cargo operation team, Patterson and 2 route analysts, came to the field for a 2-day operational assessment. They walked every inch of it with Noah, who answered their technical questions with the same precision he brought to everything, and who, Vanessa noted, did not perform competence for them the way some people perform for evaluators. He just answered questions correctly, which was the same thing but without the performance. Patterson came to her after the second day and said, "This guy is the most technically capable airfield operator I've encountered in 30 years. Where did he come from?" "Virginia Tech," she said, "then Georgia Tech, then the DOD. Patterson looked at her for a moment. "And he's running a 4,000-foot strip in Shenandoah County. He's running the best documented small airfield you've ever assessed," she said. "You said so yourself." "I did," Patterson allowed. "I'm not complaining. I'm just—" He shook his head. "It's unusual." "Most things worth finding are," she said. The first cargo route was formally proposed in October, a triangular routing connecting the field with a regional distribution hub in Roanoke and a freight forwarding facility in Hagerstown, Maryland. Light turboprop freight, 3 movements a week to start. The route filled a gap in the Mid-Atlantic regional distribution network that Vanessa had been watching for 2 years. The gap existed because no one had found the right originating point. The originating point had been here all along, on a 4,000-foot strip in a Virginia valley, run by a man with a DOD commendation and a gap-toothed son who read restoration manuals by flashlight. She presented the route proposal to her board at the October meeting. Presley asked several pointed questions about the pending zoning challenge and its potential impact on the timeline. She answered each one with the specific information Dana and Yee had prepared. And when Presley said, "You seem very confident for a situation with a pending legal challenge," she said, "I'm confident in the quality of the legal record and the quality of the man running the field. Both are excellent." Presley looked at her over his glasses. "The quality of the man," he said. "The quality of the operation," she said, "which reflects the quality of the man. Those things are not separable in this case." The board approved the route proposal, 4-1. Presley abstained, which was his version of support. Gosh. The night before the hearing, she drove to the airfield and stayed. Not on the pull-out couch this time. She'd started keeping a bag in the car on the Fridays she drove down, because the bar and the mattress had not improved, and Noah had a spare room that had been Eli's reading room, and then gradually became the room where Vanessa's spare things accumulated without anyone explicitly authorizing the accumulation. A jacket, a phone charger, a pair of running shoes she'd used one morning on the access road, and left because she'd started running the road 3 times a week when she was there, and it made no sense to carry them back and forth. She ran the access road in the mornings. Noah ran it too, separately, earlier because he was up before 6 and didn't wake people to tell them about it. She found out he ran it when she saw him coming back one morning, still breathing hard, while she was lacing up at the hangar door. "You run," she said. "Most mornings," he said. I run at 7. I run at 5:30. "Why 5:30? "Because Eli's up at 6:30, and I need the 30 minutes between the run and his morning to be functional." She looked at him. "What does functional look like?" "Coffee and the maintenance log," he said. "And I review whatever he's left on my pillow." She shook her head. "He's still leaving things on your pillow." Last week it was a diagram of a theoretical reusable launch vehicle he designed. Noah wiped his face with his sleeve. "He named it. He called it the Bennett 1. She stopped lacing her shoe. "Noah." "I know," he said, and his voice did the thing it did when something had gotten through the careful outer layer. Not cracking, just different. "I know." She finished lacing her shoe and went on her run. The access road was a mile out to Route 17 and a mile back, and in the October mornings the air was cold enough to see her breath, and the trees on the east side of the road had turned the specific red-orange of Virginia fall, and she ran it thinking about a boy who named things after his family and a man who ran at 5:30 a.m. to keep 30 minutes of margin for his son, and she came back breathing hard and feeling, for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was not a woman who thought in terms of supposed to. She was a woman who thought in terms of metrics and capacity and whether the math worked. The math in her life had always been legible: revenue, growth, acquisition, scale. These were numbers she understood. She did not have a number for how it felt to run a gravel road in October at the edge of a Virginia airfield, or for the weight of Eli's arms around her neck when she arrived on Fridays, a habit that had started somewhere around week 6 and simply continued, or for the specific quality of sitting across from Noah Bennett in the evening when Eli was in bed and the day was done and the conversation went wherever it wanted without agenda. She didn't have a number for it. She was working on being okay with that. The night before the hearing, they sat on the hangar steps. It was past 10. Eli had been in bed since 8:30. The sky was clear and cold, and the stars over the valley were the kind of stars you don't see in Washington, where the light pollution erases everything above a certain magnitude. Out here, the sky kept going. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "About tomorrow?" He thought about it honestly. "Not about the outcome. We have the documentation. We have the argument. Dana and Carol know what they're doing." He paused. "What I don't like is the exposure. Having to sit in a county planning room and explain why what my father built is legitimate. That should not require explanation." "No," she said, "it shouldn't." But Croft doesn't care about what should require explanation. He cares about what can be made to require explanation. That's the move. Make everything that was settled feel unsettled, so the cost of holding on becomes high enough that you let go. "He miscalculated," she said. "Maybe." Not maybe. He picked a target he thought was isolated. He didn't account for the fact that isolated people sometimes stop being isolated. He looked at her. She looked back. "I wasn't looking for this," he said. Not as a complaint, more like stating a fact about weather, something that happened to you rather than something you planned. "Neither was I," she said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Claire." He stopped, started again. "It's been 5 years. I didn't think I was someone who would... I thought that was done, that part of my life." "I know," she said. "I'm not easy," he said. "I know that. I'm up at 5:30, and the field is always going to be part of the answer to every question. And I have a kid who is extraordinary," she said. "A lot," he finished, smiling slightly. "He's a lot." "Noah." She turned to face him on the step. "I drove an hour and 40 minutes to a rural airfield in Virginia to review a lease, and I've been back approximately 30 times since. I keep a jacket in your spare room. I know Eli's soccer schedule and his class schedule and the name of every aircraft on this property." She looked at him steadily. "I'm here. That's not ambiguous." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said, "it's not." She leaned against his shoulder. He let her. His arm found its way around her in the unhurried way that things move when there's no urgency, because there's also no intention to go anywhere. They sat on the hangar steps and looked at the stars over the valley and the windsock barely moving in the still night air. "The Bennett won," she said after a while. He made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something she didn't have a word for. "He showed me the calculations," he said. "They're not entirely wrong." "Of course they're not." "He's using mass ratios from an Apollo-era reference I had on the shelf. He didn't know what it was. He just found it and used it because the numbers made sense." She looked up at the sky. The stars didn't move, obviously, but the longer you looked, the more depth appeared, layers of light behind light, distance made visible by accumulation. "When he's old enough," she said, "we should take him to a launch site. Let him see one." Noah was quiet for a moment. "We," he said. She felt the word land. She hadn't planned it. It had arrived in the sentence naturally, the way things arrive when they've been true long enough to start saying themselves. "Yes," she said. "We." He pulled her slightly closer. Neither of them said anything else about it, because there was nothing else to say that the word hadn't already covered. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in a county planning room that smelled of carpet cleaner and industrial coffee, and the particular anxiety of proceedings that matter to the people inside them. 14 rows of chairs, a commission table with 5 supervisors and the planning director, a gallery that was more full than county planning hearings usually were, because word travels in small counties and the Bennett Airfield had been in this valley for almost 50 years and people had opinions about what happened to it. Noah sat at the respondents' table with Carol Yee on his left and Dana on his right. He wore the white dress shirt, the one from the photograph on his office wall, or one like it. She couldn't tell for certain. His hands were on the table still. Vanessa sat in the second row of the gallery. She was not a party to this proceeding. She was an interested observer. She wore a charcoal jacket and kept her hands in her lap and watched the room. Croft's attorneys were two men from a McLean firm she recognized. Expensive, smooth, practiced. They had a presentation. They had a binder. They spoke in the measured, confident language of lawyers who have done this in similar rooms many times. They argued that the proposed expansion of commercial aviation operations constituted a change of use incompatible with the existing agricultural zoning designation. They cited the ambiguity in the county code. They were thorough. Carol Yee was more thorough. She stood up with the original 1978 permit and Harold B. Garland's notation, and she walked the commission through it line by line. She cited the 2009 case. She cross-referenced Section 9.2a. She was 62 years old and had been practicing land use law for 35 years, and she did not raise her voice once. And when Croft's lead attorney tried to argue that the Garland notation was non-binding, she said, "Commissioner Walsh, may I direct your attention to the county's own procedural guidelines from 1975, which established that a planning officer's contemporaneous written finding in an approved permit file constitutes an administrative determination that carries the weight of policy interpretation." And she produced the 1975 procedural guidelines, which she had found in the county archives and which she had apparently been carrying in her briefcase for 6 weeks. The gallery was very quiet. Noah didn't look back at Vanessa during the proceeding. He kept his eyes on the commission table, hands still, listening to every word. At one point during the lunch recess, he turned and found her standing in the corridor outside the hearing room. He looked at her for a moment without saying anything. "Carol is excellent," Vanessa said. "Yes," he said. "The 1975 guidelines were a good find." "She found them in week 2, he said. "She told me about them last week. She said she was saving them." "For the moment of maximum effect," Vanessa said. "Yeah." He looked down the corridor. "My father would have—" He stopped. She waited. "He would have found that funny," Noah said. "Someone finding a county document from 1975 to protect a runway built in 1978. He would have said the paperwork outlasted the man who filed it." "It did," she said. "He filed it carefully enough that it did." Noah was quiet for a moment. "He was careful about everything," he said. "I used to think that was just how he was. Now I think he knew." He paused. He knew someone would need it someday. He just didn't know who. The clerk called them back in. The commission deliberated for 40 minutes. Vanessa counted. She sat in the second row and looked at her hands and counted the minutes the way you count when something matters, and time has become the only variable you cannot control. The chair of the commission, a woman in her 60s named Supervisor Holt, who had said almost nothing during the hearing but who had listened with an attentiveness that Vanessa had noticed and found encouraging, read the finding in the flat, careful voice of official language. The commission found that the existing county permit, supported by the planning officer's 1978 administrative determination and consistent with Section 9.2a of the current county code, established aviation commercial operations as a compatible use within the existing zoning designation. The proposed expansion did not constitute a change of use requiring additional zoning review. The challenge was denied. Carol Yee made a small note on her legal pad. Dana took off her glasses and polished them. Noah sat very still for a moment. Then he exhaled. Quietly, through his nose, the way a person breathes out something they've been holding for a long time. He turned around in his chair and found Vanessa in the second row. She held his gaze. She nodded once. He nodded back. Outside in the parking lot, in the cold November air, Croft's attorneys got into a black sedan and left without speaking to anyone. Croft himself had not attended, which said everything about how he had expected the hearing to go and which Vanessa noted with a quiet professional satisfaction. Eli was at school. He'd been kept informed at an 8-year-old's level. Some people were trying to cause problems for the airfield, and adults were handling it. And he had asked 2 questions. First, whether the airfield was going to be okay, and second, whether Vanessa was helping. When told yes to both, he had returned to his restoration manual with the focused serenity of someone whose important questions have been answered. In the parking lot, Carol Yee shook hands with Noah and then with Vanessa and said, "The 1978 permit is now the strongest document in that county's planning file," and got in her car. Dana said, "I'll send the formal ruling summary by end of week," and did the same. Then it was just Noah and Vanessa in the parking lot, and the November sky, and the particular quality of a Tuesday morning after something hard is finished. He looked tired. The sustained, careful tension of the past 2 months was releasing in stages, and releasing looked like exhaustion before it looked like relief. "Lunch?" she said. He looked at her. "I know a diner on Route 17, she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I know the diner on Route 17, he said. "Then you know the coffee is terrible and the pie is excellent." "The apple," he said, "not the cherry." "Obviously not the cherry," she said. They drove separately to the diner and sat in a booth by the window and ordered the apple pie before the sandwiches because, after a morning like that, order of operations was negotiable. The coffee was bad. The pie was exactly what it needed to be. They didn't talk much about the hearing. There wasn't much to say. It was over. They'd won. The documentation had done what 11 years of careful maintenance had prepared it to do. The rest was lawyers' paperwork and Croft's next decision, which was either to accept the loss or find another angle, and whichever he chose, they would handle. What they talked about instead was the East Apron modification timeline and whether the first cargo route should launch in February or March, and the fact that Eli had decided the Bennett 1 needed a second stage and had produced revised mass ratio calculations that Noah had checked and found, unsettlingly, to be correct. They talked about the Stinson. Noah said he'd pulled the wing fabric section from storage last weekend and assessed the condition, and it was worse than he'd hoped and better than he'd feared, which was the standard human situation applied to a 60-year-old airplane. He said Eli wanted to be involved in the restoration. He said he was thinking about letting him. He said this with the look of a man who has already decided and is working through the rationalization, which she recognized because she had seen it before and she was not going to call attention to it. "You've already decided to let him," she said. He looked at her. "You looked at him pulling the fabric section, and you already decided," she said. A pause. "He had the restoration manual," Noah said. "He was reading the correct chapter." "Of course he was," she said. "He's 8. I know. He shouldn't—" "Noah," she said, "let him help with the airplane. He's going to be careful. He's going to read every page. He's going to ask you questions you have to look up." She looked at him across the table. "Let him do it." He looked at his coffee, looked at the pie, looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She ate the last of her pie. Outside, Route 17 moved at its Tuesday pace. A farm truck, a school bus, a county maintenance vehicle with a yellow light on top. "Noah," she said. He looked up. "I want to talk about the partnership agreement." "The formal one." "Yes." She put her fork down. "I want to restructure the terms. What I proposed in August was a lease framework with partnership language. I want to revise it to a genuine co-development agreement, equal operational standing. Bennett Aviation keeps its name and identity on everything. Blackwell provides the capital and route infrastructure. Revenue sharing that reflects the actual value of what you bring, which is not just the land, it's the operation, the documentation record, the maintenance capacity, the instrument certification." He was watching her. "I'm proposing 60-40, she said. "In your favor on operational income, I carry the capital investment and take the majority of route revenue, but the field operations belong to you in terms of both decision-making authority and income structure." He was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" he said. "You could negotiate a better deal than that." "Better for me," she said. "Not better." He looked at her, really looked, the way he'd looked at her in that first meeting, reading something she hadn't handed him. "This airfield was underfunded because I've been running it alone with limited capital," he said. Not because of anything wrong with the operation. I know that. With proper investment, it generates significantly more. I know that too. So the 60-40 isn't charity, he said. It's accurate. Yes, she said. It's accurate. He was quiet for another moment. Send me the revised terms, he said. I'll read them. I know you will, she said. He almost smiled. And I'll annotate them in the margins, he said. I'm counting on it, she said. Outside, a piper flew low and slow to the north, descending toward the valley. They both heard it. They both looked up, automatically, the way people do when they've spent enough time near aircraft that the sound has become part of how they track the world. He's too fast on final, Noah said, watching the shape through the window. He'll correct, she said. He watched until the aircraft disappeared behind the tree line. Yeah, he said, he will. The revised partnership agreement came back from Noah with 11 margin annotations. Vanessa read every one of them at her desk in Washington on a Wednesday morning with her second coffee going cold beside her keyboard. And she read them in the order he'd written them. Sequential, methodical, the way he did everything. And not one of them was unreasonable. 3 were corrections to language that was genuinely imprecise. 2 were additions she hadn't thought of. 4 were questions that deserved answers she didn't yet have. 1 was a note in the margin that said simply, "This clause assumes bad faith." Rewrite, which was accurate, and she rewrote it. The 11th annotation was on the last page, beside the signature line. In his careful handwriting, it said, "This is good work, NB." She sat with that for a moment longer than the other 10. Then she called Dana and told her to prepare the final version.
February arrived the way February arrives in the Shenandoah Valley. Not gently. The first week brought a cold front that dropped temperatures into the teens and put a skim of ice on the runway that Noah was out breaking up at 5 a.m. with a push broom and a bag of ground dicer that he'd ordered in October because he planned for things the way his father had planned for things, which was by assuming the worst-case season and buying accordingly. Vanessa arrived on a Friday morning and found him finishing the last section near the south threshold, the broom handle in both hands, breath clouding in the cold. She parked and got out and stood there for a moment, watching him work. He didn't look up. "There's coffee in the office," he said. "I know where the coffee is," she said. "It's cold." "I can see that." "The runway's clear," he said. "We can receive the first Roanoke movement this afternoon if Patterson's team is ready on their end." She had driven down specifically for the first cargo movement. 3 months of route planning, permit coordination, ground handling agreements, and insurance paperwork, and it came down to a turboprop Cessna Caravan loaded with freight, making a 40-minute flight from Roanoke to land on a runway that had been waiting for exactly this use for 47 years without knowing it. "Patterson's ready," she said. They depart at 2. Noah leaned the broom against the fence and looked at the runway one more time. It caught the winter light evenly, the center lines crisp and white, the surface clear and gray and solid. "Good," he said. She handed him coffee from the thermos she'd brought from Washington, because the office coffee maker had finally died the week before, and he hadn't replaced it yet, and she wasn't going to let the first cargo day start on bad coffee. He took it, looked at the thermos. "You brought your own," he said. "I brought ours," she said. He held the thermos for a moment. Then he poured the coffee and drank it and didn't say anything else, which was answer enough. Eli had the day off school, a teacher planning day, and he stationed himself outside the hangar at 1:30 with a pair of binoculars that had belonged to Noah's father and that he'd found in the old hangar months ago and adopted without formal permission. He'd been wearing them around his neck since breakfast. "You know you can just watch with your eyes," Noah said. "The binoculars are better," Eli said. "It's a Caravan. It's not a small aircraft." "Binoculars are still better," Eli said, with the serene confidence of someone who has already settled this question internally and sees no reason to revisit it. Vanessa stood beside him. She had her phone in her hand. Patterson was texting updates from the Roanoke end. And she watched the northeastern sky where the aircraft would appear first, coming down the valley. "How long?" Eli asked. "They departed at 2:03, she said. "So, maybe 12 more minutes." He raised the binoculars.
She looked at Noah, who was standing slightly apart with his arms folded, watching the sky with the expression he wore when he was thinking about something he wasn't going to say yet. "You okay?" she said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "It's just—" He stopped, started again. "My dad talked about cargo operations when I was a kid. He said the field could handle it if someone ever built the right route. He just never had the capital to develop it." She looked at the runway. "He was right," she said. "He usually was," Noah said. "About the field." Eli made a sound, not a word, just an alert sound, and pointed northeast. Vanessa looked up. The caravan was a small shape dropping below the ridgeline, engine note arriving a half-second behind the visual, that particular PT-6 turbine sound that she'd learned to identify in the past months, the way you learn a new language by immersion. "There," Eli said. He was tracking it with the binoculars, his whole body oriented northeast, perfectly still except for the slight adjustment of the glasses. The caravan flew the approach clean and level, crossed the threshold at the right speed. She knew the right speed now, which was a fact about herself she wouldn't have predicted 6 months ago, and touched down with a single chirp of rubber and rolled out smoothly along the center line. Noah's center lines. "Nice landing," Eli said. "Yes," Vanessa agreed. "The crosswind correction on short final was good," Eli added. "There was a left crosswind. Did you see how he crabbed into it and then kicked it straight at the flare?" She had not seen that. She looked at Noah. "He's right," Noah said. "Good catch." Eli lowered the binoculars with the expression of someone who has just confirmed what they already suspected about their own observation skills, and watched the caravan taxi toward the ramp. Vanessa's phone buzzed. Patterson. "Caravan is down. First movement complete. Roanoke cleared for return leg. Hagerstown confirmed for Thursday." And then, after a pause, "Good field." She showed it to Noah. He read it, nodded once. "Good field," he said quietly to himself, or to the runway, or to something she couldn't hear. Then he went out to marshal the caravan to the ramp, because that was his job and he was going to do it. And she watched him walk out across the concrete apron with his orange wands and his steady, unhurried stride. And she thought about a woman she'd never met who used to sit on a truck hood and watch the small planes come in. She thought she understood that now. She thought Claire Bennett had known exactly what she was looking at. Harlan Croft made one more move in March. She found out about it the way she found out about most things, from Dana, by phone, in the car, driving west on Route 66 on a Friday afternoon. "He approached 2 of your Blackwell investors," Dana said, "specifically the 2 who were most ambivalent about the Bennett Field partnership. He's suggesting that the partnership is a personal investment by you rather than a sound business decision, and he's seeding doubt about the regulatory history, selectively citing the complaint without mentioning the outcome." Vanessa kept her eyes on the road. "Which investors?" "Hargreaves and Vance." Hargreaves she wasn't worried about. Vance she was slightly worried about because Vance had always been transactional, and transactional people could be moved by alternative narratives if the narrative was presented well enough. "What does he want?" she asked. "Ultimately, I think he still wants the land. I think he believes if he can destabilize your partnership with Bennett, Noah becomes vulnerable again, underfunded, legally pressured, without a reliable operational partner." "He doesn't understand the partnership," she said. "No," Dana agreed. "He still thinks it's a real estate transaction." She drove for a moment in silence. "Set up a call with Vance for Monday," she said. "I'll handle it directly." "What are you going to say?" "The truth," she said, "which is that the first cargo route is operational. The Roanoke leg has run 4 movements in 3 weeks with 0 incidents. The Hagerstown route launches in April, and the field's revenue projection for year 1 exceeds the original estimate by 31%, because Patterson's team underestimated the regional demand." She paused. "And that the regulatory history is completely clean, which any investor can verify in 30 seconds by pulling the FAA's public compliance database." "And Croft?" "I'll mention that a competitor attempted 2 separate regulatory and legal challenges against the field, and that both were defeated comprehensively, and that the documentation record that defeated them is now part of the public county planning record and available for any investor who wants to read it." Another pause. And I'll mention that I consider anyone who attempts to interfere with my business operations through investor contact to be acting in bad faith, and that I have Dana." She heard Dana make a sound. "I'll put that slightly differently," Dana said. "Put it however you need to," she said. "The meaning stays." The Vance call happened Monday. It lasted 22 minutes. Vance asked 6 questions. She answered 5 of them directly, and on the 6th, "Is this personal for you?" she said, "I make 30 decisions a year that affect significant capital. I make them based on data, operational assessment, and the quality of the people involved. The Bennett Field Partnership scores in the top 5% on all 3 criteria. Whether it's also personal is not a question I'm going to answer because it's not relevant to whether the business case is sound, and the business case is sound." Vance said, "Fair enough." Croft, as far as she could tell, made no further moves after that. He had spent political capital, legal fees, and investor goodwill on 2 failed challenges. At some point, the arithmetic of attrition works against the aggressor, and Croft understood arithmetic. He redirected his interest to a commercial development in West Virginia that had fewer complications, and the Shenandoah Valley stopped appearing in his planning documents. She never told Noah about the investor contact, not because she was hiding it from him, but because she'd handled it before it became a problem, and there was a category of things she absorbed on behalf of people she cared about without requiring them to carry the weight of knowing. She had not grown up doing this. She had learned it here, in this valley, watching a man who had been absorbing weight for years without advertising it. She wasn't going to tell him about that either. Spring came in a way that felt, to both of them, like something that had been earned. The East Apron modification was complete by the end of March. The expanded turnaround geometry that Noah had drawn on the whiteboard in September, now concrete and functional. The contractor had done it in 2 phases to minimize runway disruption, and Noah had supervised every pour with the particular attention of someone who knows that concrete work done wrong is concrete work you live with for 30 years. The Hagerstown route launched in April, as planned. 3 movements a week, light freight, point to point. Patterson sent her a revised revenue projection in the 3rd week of April that made her sit back in her chair and read it twice. She forwarded it to Noah with the message, "Your father was right about the route potential." He replied, "Don't tell Eli. He'll put it in his design specifications for the Bennett 1. She laughed at her desk in Washington alone at 8 in the morning, which her assistant noticed through the glass wall, and which the assistant had quietly stopped finding remarkable because it happened more often now. And the assistant had put together a reasonable theory about why and was professionally keeping it to herself. Rick Gallardo was full-time by May. Noah hired him outright, formally, with benefits, the first time since taking over the field that the operation was large enough to support a full-time salaried employee. Rick accepted the offer in the way Rick accepted most things, which was by showing up the next morning at 6 a.m. and getting to work without ceremony. "Did you say anything when he accepted?" Vanessa asked. "I said the coffee maker was broken, so he'd need to bring his own for a while," Noah said. "That's what you said." "He said he'd bring a French press." She looked at him. "I got him a new coffee maker," Noah said, obviously. "When?" "That afternoon." She shook her head. "You're terrible at receiving things." "I got him the coffee maker," he said. "You got it that afternoon, so you didn't have to receive his gesture of bringing the French press." He looked at her with the expression of a man who knows he's been accurately described and is choosing whether to engage with it. "The coffee maker was better," he said. "That's not the point. The French press requires timing, and he starts at 6 when I'm already—" "Noah?" "The coffee maker was better," he said again, and she let it go because some arguments were about the thing they appeared to be about, and some weren't, and this one was actually about a man learning, slowly and imperfectly, that accepting things from people who care about you is not a diminishment. He was learning, not fast, not smoothly, but learning. Eli turned 9 in June. The party was at the Airfield, because of course it was. Where else would Eli Bennett's birthday party be? 8 kids from his class, 3 of whom had never been near a small aircraft in their lives, and who spent the first 40 minutes of the party pressed against the hangar window watching the caravan taxi, which Eli tolerated with the patience of a person who has been watching airplanes his whole life and understands that others need time to calibrate. Noah had made the birthday cake himself. It was chocolate, 2 layers, frosted unevenly because he had done it himself at 11 p.m. the night before and wasn't going to pretend frosting was a skill he'd developed. "It looks fine," Vanessa said when he showed her before the party. "It leans," he said. "It leans slightly. The second layer is not centered." "Eli is 9. He's not going to care that the layer is not centered." "I care," Noah said. She looked at him. He was standing in the kitchen at 7 a.m., looking at a cake with the same expression he gave structural engineering problems, which was both completely ridiculous and entirely characteristic. "It tastes right," she said. "I know because I had a piece last night when you went to bed." He turned and looked at her. "You ate the birthday cake," he said. "A corner piece. The corner was going to fall off anyway because of the lean." He looked at the cake. Back at her. "How was it?" he said. "Very good," she said. "Better than the diner pie." He looked almost pleased, which was as close as Noah got to proud of himself in the kitchen. The cake, at the party, was a significant success. Eli did not notice the lean. He did notice immediately that the chocolate frosting was homemade and not from a container, because Eli noticed specific things, and he said Dad made the frosting from scratch to his friends in a tone that conveyed this was information they should find impressive, which it was. Vanessa sat on the tailgate of Noah's truck and watched 8 9-year-olds eat birthday cake on a Virginia airfield in June, and she thought about the specific improbability of her life at this moment. The girl who had driven a cracked windshield truck through Virginia winters alone, who had built a company out of a single route and pure refusal to stop, who had arrived at a rural airfield in August to negotiate a lease and had found this. Not a deal, not an asset, not a strategic acquisition. A runway her father built with borrowed equipment. A boy who read restoration manuals by flashlight. A man who painted centerlines straight because he wanted them straight. Who was standing 15 feet away from her right now, explaining to 3 9-year-olds why the caravan's nose gear was configured differently from the Bell helicopter's skid gear, with the patient specificity of someone who believes children deserve real answers to real questions. She watched him with those kids and thought about how she had walked into that first meeting, certain she understood exactly what kind of person she was dealing with, and how wrong she had been, and how grateful she was for that particular wrongness. She was not a woman who used the word grateful easily. It required acknowledging that something had come from outside yourself, and Vanessa had spent most of her adult life operating on the belief that what mattered came from inside, from effort, from refusal to stop. She still believed that. She just understood now that it wasn't the whole picture. Sometimes what matters arrives in a place you drove to for completely different reasons, and recognizing it when it's covered in grease and not extending its hand is a skill you have to develop on the spot, with no preparation and no guarantee. She had developed it, more or less. She was still developing it. That felt right. That felt like the honest version of the thing. She moved in on a Sunday in late July. Not dramatically. There was no conversation with a declaration in it. What happened was that she had been staying at the airfield 4 nights a week since May, and her Washington apartment had begun to look like a storage unit with ambitions. And Marcus, her driver, the man who had been with her for 9 years, had started packing her car on Thursdays with a care and comprehensiveness that made it clear he'd been paying attention. And one Sunday she arrived with 3 boxes and a painting she'd had in her apartment since she was 25, and put them in the spare room, and Noah came in from the hangar and looked at the boxes and the painting and looked at her. "The painting," he said. "I've had it since I was 25, she said. "It needs a wall." He looked at it. It was an abstract, deep blues and a streak of amber, done by a street artist she'd met in Baltimore the year she quit the bank. She'd paid $40 for it and had moved it to every apartment she'd ever had. "That wall," he said, pointing to the space above the desk in the spare room. "That's what I was thinking," she said. He picked it up and hung it. He had a level. Of course he had a level. He used it. "Straight?" he asked. "Straight," she said. He stepped back and looked at it. The blue and amber against the white wall, the light from the window hitting it at an angle. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said. Eli appeared in the doorway, looked at the painting, looked at the boxes, looked at Vanessa with an expression of uncomplicated satisfaction. "Are you going to live here?" he said.
I'm going to be here a lot, she said, which was the honest version. He thought about this for approximately 2 seconds. Good, he said, because I want to show you the Stinson wing section, and Dad keeps saying it's not ready to show anyone, but I think it is, and I need a second opinion. Eli, Noah said. It's structurally interesting, Eli said. She would want to see it. He was right, she would want to see it. She looked at Noah, who had the expression of a man who lives surrounded by people who are right about him and has decided to find this more amusing than annoying. Show me the wing section, she said. I told you, Eli said to his father, and led Vanessa out to the old hangar before Noah could respond. The Stinson wing section was, in fact, structurally interesting. Eli had laid out the documentation beside it. Noah's restoration manual, 2 pages he'd printed from an aviation history database, and a hand-drawn diagram in his own notebook that showed the wing spar construction with annotations she recognized as his handwriting, precise and slightly too large for the page, the handwriting of a person whose thoughts move faster than the pen. She crouched beside the wing and looked at the fabric and the underlying structure. And Eli talked, and she listened, and some of what he said she understood, and some of it she didn't, and she said so honestly when she didn't, which he accepted as an invitation to explain, which he did, and she felt the particular pleasure of being taught something real by someone who genuinely knows it. Noah appeared in the doorway of the old hangar after about 20 minutes and leaned against the frame and watched them. She didn't look up. The compression rib spacing, she said to Eli. You said it's different from the production drawings? By about 3 millimeters on the outboard ribs, Eli said. I think it was a field modification. The documentation supports it. There's a repair record from 1963 that references rib replacement. And you found that in the manual? In the appendix, he said. Dad's handwriting. He was annotating what his dad told him. She looked up at Noah. He was looking at the wing section. Your grandfather told your dad, and your dad wrote it in the manual, and now you found it in the appendix, she said. Eli looked at the notebook, then at the wing, then at his father in the doorway. Yeah, he said. He said it simply, without weight, the way 9-year-olds sometimes say things that carry more history than they know. Noah looked at his son for a moment. Good find, he said. Both of you. Unset. Summer turned and the airfield grew the way things grow when they've been waiting in good soil. Not explosively, not overnight, but steadily, with the particular momentum of something that has been carefully built and is now being carefully used. By September, the field was running 12 cargo movements a week across 3 routes. Patterson hired a ground operations coordinator who drove from Harrisonburg 3 days a week, and who had the professional opinion, shared with Vanessa after his 2nd month, that the airfield's operational efficiency was unlike anything he'd seen at this scale, and that the maintenance standards bordered on obsessive, and that the guy who ran it clearly knew things that most field operators didn't know. He was an aerospace engineer, Vanessa said. That explains some of it, Patterson's coordinator said. Not all of it. Some of it is just care. Some people care about a thing and some people don't. Yes, she said. Some people do. The Hendersons still came on Saturdays. They brought cookies when Mrs. Henderson had been baking, which was most Saturdays. Eli now received his with one hand because he was 9 and had decided 2-handed cookie receiving was for younger children. Mrs. Henderson had, at some point, started giving Vanessa 2 cookies instead of 1, which was not a small gesture from a woman who measured her cookie tin carefully. You've been adopted, Noah told her. By the Hendersons? By the field, he said. The Hendersons are part of the field. She considered this, being adopted by a field, by a community of people who came to a specific piece of land on Saturday mornings, because it mattered to them, and had always mattered to them, and who had extended that mattering to include her without ceremony or announcement just by handing her an extra cookie and not commenting on it. She thought about her Washington apartment, which she still technically owned, the lease ran through December, and which she visited now maybe once a week for meetings that required being physically in the city. She thought about the painting on the wall of the spare room, the deep blue and the streak of amber, and how it looked better in that light than it ever had in any apartment she'd hung it in before. She thought about belonging, which was a concept she had long held at arm's length,
because wanting to belong somewhere specific felt like a vulnerability she couldn't afford. She had belonged to her company, to the work, to the next goal, and the one after that. She understood now that she had been mistaking motion for arrival. You can travel very fast towards something you've already passed. Barstin. On an evening in October, 1 year, almost exactly, from the night they'd sat on the hangar steps before the zoning hearing, Noah found her in the old hangar. She was sitting on a sawhorse beside the Stinson, reading the restoration manual in the light from a work lamp. Eli had left it there after the weekend, bookmarked to the section on fabric covering techniques, and she'd picked it up without planning to and started reading it. She had been there for 45 minutes when Noah came in. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. She was wearing his flannel shirt, the gray one, over her own clothes, because the old hangar got cold in October, and the flannel had been on the hook nearest the door, and she'd taken it without thinking about it weeks ago, and it had never made it back to the hook. "Dinner's ready," he said. "In a minute," she said, not looking up. "I'm in the middle of the rib stitching section." He came in and sat on the other sawhorse and looked at the Stinson. "The rib stitching is complicated," he said. "I know. I'm reading about it." "Eli's going to want to try it." "He should try it," she said, "under supervision." "He's 9. "You were helping your father with this airplane at 9, she said. He was quiet. "Your mother told me," she said. He looked at her. "When did you talk to my mother?" She turned a page. "She called last week. I answered your phone because you were on the runway." "What did she—" He stopped. "She called to tell me that you used to come to this hangar with your father on weekends and that you would sit exactly where I'm sitting and read the manuals and ask questions he couldn't always answer." She finally looked up. "She said you were 9 when you started. She said your father always saved your spot on the sawhorse." Noah was very still. "She said she was glad you had someone again," Vanessa said. "And then she said to tell you to call her because you hadn't called in 2 weeks. He exhaled through his nose. "She said that." The exact words were, "Tell my stubborn son to pick up the phone occasionally." He looked at the Stinson. At the wing section Eli had documented. At the sawhorse she was sitting on, the one that had been his. "I'll call her tomorrow," he said. "I told her you'd call tonight," she said. He looked at her. "She's been waiting longer than tonight," she said, not unkindly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're managing my family now." "I'm being accurate about what people need," she said. "You do it for everyone else. Someone has to do it for you occasionally." He was looking at her with the third expression, the one underneath the professional face, underneath the careful man face, the one that appeared in the evenings when the day was done and there was no more managing of anything, the one she had learned over a year to read correctly. "Vanessa," he said. She closed the manual. "Yeah. I need to say something." "Okay?" He looked at his hands, then at her. "I didn't think, after Claire, I didn't think I was going to want this again. Not because I decided not to, just because I couldn't imagine it. The wanting part felt like it had gone somewhere I couldn't reach." He said this carefully, like he was delivering accurate testimony. "And then you drove up that gravel road to negotiate a lease and told me my airfield was a forgotten patch of grass." "I didn't say it was forgotten," she said. "You implied it. I was poorly informed at the time." "You were," he agreed. "And then you ate my pretzels and argued with me for 3 hours about an infrastructure clause and came back 6 times before we'd signed anything, and I—" He stopped. The careful stop. But this time he went through it. "I want this. I want you here, not 4 days a week and a jacket in the spare room. Here, with me and Eli and the field and the Stinson and whatever the Bennett one turns into when Eli is old enough to build it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking you to give up Blackwell. I'm not asking you to stop being what you are. I'm asking you to be here, fully, as yours as much as mine." She looked at him. She thought about 22 years old in a Baltimore apartment on a Sunday night, terrified and certain in equal measure, quitting a job that was slowly extracting everything interesting from her. She thought about a cracked windshield in Route 95 in January and the particular cold of a truck cab where the heat doesn't work on the passenger side. She thought about what it meant to know what you're driving toward, even when you don't know where it is yet. She had been driving toward this. She understood that now. Not this specifically, not this man, this child, this runway, this valley. But what it is. The realness of it. The weight of something that asks you to be present in it fully, not managing it from a distance, not treating it like an asset to be optimized. December, she said. He blinked. December? My Washington lease runs through December. After that, she looked at the painting that would move to a better wall. I'm here. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched the expression on his face move through something and come out the other side into something simpler and cleaner than most of what she'd seen from him. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Neither of them said anything else because the thing had been said and it was real, and further language would only have made it smaller. After a moment, she opened the restoration manual again. Dinner, he said. One more page, she said. The rib stitching is more complex than I expected. He sat back on the sawhorse and waited, because that was what you did when someone was learning something that mattered. You gave them the time to finish. But on a Saturday in November, the three of them stood by the runway at the end of the day. It had been a full day. 2 cargo movements, a fuel stop for the Hendersons, a student pilot from Harrisonburg who needed a cross-country sign-off, and a maintenance check on the caravan that Rick had flagged and Noah had completed by noon. Eli had spent the afternoon in the old hangar with the restoration manual and emerged at 4 with a question about fabric dope that Noah had answered, and then Vanessa had looked up on the FAA's materials database and found a supplementary technical note that Eli studied for 20 minutes and then said, "This changes the sequence with the gravity of a person who has found an error in a process they care about." The evening was cold and clear. The sky had gone the deep blue of late fall before dark, and the runway lights had come on, white and green at the thresholds, blue along the taxiway, and the whole field was doing what it had been doing for 47 years without stopping, which was being itself, quietly, in a Virginia valley, ready for whatever came in from the sky. Eli stood between them. He had the binoculars around his neck, which was more or less their permanent position now. He was watching a small aircraft, a Cessna, distant, coming from the north, that was not landing here, just passing through their sky on its way somewhere else. He tracked it until it was gone behind the southern ridge. Then he lowered the binoculars and looked at the runway. "When we finish the Stinson," he said, "can we fly it here?" "That's the goal," Noah said. "How long?" "Depends on how the fabric work goes. And the engine. The engine needs an overhaul." "I know," Eli said. "I read about that. The overhaul is the complicated part." "It is." Eli thought about this. "I could help," he said. "You can help with parts of it," Noah said. "The parts that are safe to help with." "You'll tell me which parts?" "Yes." Eli nodded, looked at the runway again, then at Vanessa. "Are you going to learn to fly?" he asked. She looked at Noah. He was looking at the runway with the expression she knew, the one where he was thinking about something he hadn't said yet. "I'm thinking about it," she said. "Dad could teach you," Eli said. "He's a good teacher. He explains things correctly." "I know he does," she said. "He explained to me why the lift equation works at a 3rd grade level and a 9th grade level and chose which one based on which day it was and what mood I was in," Eli said with complete seriousness. "That's impressive," she said. "It was," Eli agreed. Noah shook his head slightly, which was as close as he came to embarrassed. The runway lights were reflected faintly in the cold air. The windsock had stilled. Somewhere to the north, above the ridge, a single star had appeared. The first one, the one that shows up before the rest, that holds the sky alone for a few minutes before the others join it. Eli saw it. He pointed. "First one," he said. "First one," Noah confirmed. They stood there, the 3 of them, watching the sky fill in, not talking, just present in it, in the way you can be present in something when you're not afraid of the quiet, when you've learned that silence between people who trust each other is not absence, but its own kind of fullness. Vanessa thought about what Claire had called this place, the edge of something, not the end, the edge, where something was always about to happen. She understood it now completely. The edge wasn't a place where you were about to fall. It was a place where you could see clearly. back at where you'd come from, and forward at what was coming. And where the air was different, and where the things that mattered declared themselves without needing to shout. She had spent 10 years moving fast enough that edges blurred into one long middle. She had built something real by that motion, and she didn't regret it, but she was standing still now on a runway apron in November, and she could see everything. Noah's hand found hers in the dark. Not a gesture, just there. The way hands find each other when they've been reaching in the same direction long enough. She held it. Eli was still watching the stars appear, naming each one as he found it in the building dark, confident, and methodical, cataloging the sky the way he cataloged everything. Because knowing the names of things was how you understood what you were part of. The airfield hummed quietly around them, the field his grandfather built. The runway her partner painted straight because he wanted it straight. The routes she'd designed. The cargo that moved across 12 states and now landed on this runway too, connecting this valley to the larger world that had always been there waiting for it. There are people who build things and walk away when they're done. And there are people who stay inside what they've built and keep building, year after year, in the quiet and the cold and the heat, because the thing is worth the staying. Noah Bennett had always known which kind of person he was. It had taken Vanessa Blackwell a year in a Virginia valley and 11 annotated margin notes and one leaning birthday cake, and a boy with binoculars who read restoration manuals by flashlight to learn that she was the same. She was glad she learned it. She was glad she drove down that gravel road. She was glad the GPS stopped working.